have been waiting. So we'll just let a few people get here in the chat, and if you're listening on archive, thank you for joining us after the fact. I know the time's not ideal for everyone, but I do thank you for watching, supporting the channel. Quite a few things on my list to talk about tonight. Obviously your questions too in the chat, also some questions from Patreon, but I'll just do a quick rundown in terms of my list, things that I'm quite keen to talk about. Obviously, we've got the big one this weekend, Ruiz Jr. and Joshua, the rematch. Repeat or revenge? Who wins? How? What's going to happen? Let me know your thoughts on that. Pretty hefty undercard in terms of heavyweight fights, so it's going to keep me busy, which will be Sunday morning New Zealand time, where I'll be watching. The undercard, Povetkin, Hunter, White, Wok, Hrgovic, Molina, Majidov, and Little. We'll talk about the Deontay Wilder pay-per-view numbers, obviously all over the place. We waited for some time for those numbers to come out, and there's no real consensus about what they actually are. We'll get to that. Aslanbek Makhmadov, he returns this weekend, as does Simon Keane on the same card in Canada. Also, one of Anthony Joshua's former opponents in the amateurs who beat him quite famously, Mihai Nistor, he's turned pro. We'll quickly touch on that as well, and maybe some other things as they crop up along the way in the chat. And the chat has started working for me. I was just thinking I'm just talking to no one. So we've got about 21 people in the chat. So hello and thank you for joining the stream. JPK World says, hey, hello to you. Hello, IEB. Hello to Gareth Hancock, Unrivaled Boxing Talk and News. Good morning. Traveller Green, hello there to you too, sir. Theomilis Lofi, he says, yo, yo, yo. Archie, cheer bro, cheer to you too. Adam, to fam. Coach Qatar, good morning from Qatar. You got the Football World Cup coming up, don't you? That must be quite an event for that country. That's a massive, massive sporting event. We've got Redian says loads of pressure on British fans to have to support Joshua. Unga says hi, Mr. Squared. Shane says, why are you called Boxing Squared? By the way, I can get to that a little bit later. I'll just quickly catch up on because one of these things that happens really early on the stream, and there's a whole screen of comments that are already coming in. It's so easy to get behind, and all of a sudden I'm talking about something but responding to your comment 30 minutes later. So I'll try be a bit more on top of the comments where I can. So Archie says Joshua to twat Ruiz. Matt says kia ora. IEB says looking for my man Hunter to do something cool. Redian says I'd rather pick a fighter on personally and track record than where they got squeezed out. So Marcus says good morning from Norway. Good morning to you too. Where are we here? So John says notifications for your page aren't very good. Had to search. I think you have to turn them on and hit the bell. Unga says Nistor fight was a good fun fight. I've seen just a quick highlight of that, which was on Twitter, which I did retweet. So one of the, if you don't follow this guy on Twitter already, he does a lot of heavyweight stuff, a lot of heavyweight. So he just follows the division as a fan. It's at BDB, so that's BEADYBEA. A lot of highlights. So he doesn't report or anything like that. It's just little highlights from fights all over the world, often some of the most obscure ones as well. So I recommend you do follow him. JPK World says, I think Hrgovic will stop Molina, but I think it will be his hardest fight yet. I'm not convinced, but we shall see. So Heavy D says, morning brother, morning to you too. Marcus says, hello Boxing Squared, hello back. John Otter, good morning Boxing Squared, how are you today mate? Actually, I just got up from a 3-hour sleep, so I'm actually feeling pretty good, so pretty refreshed. Part of the reason I was 5 minutes late getting into it. So evening Boxing Squared, evening back to you too Liam as well. So Unrivaled Boxing Talk and News says, can I get your breakdown of Hunter Povetkin? How do you see it going? I will get to that fight. I'll just catch up on the chat here before getting to my first topic. So whose arms are longer? Ruiz versus AJ, Jimmy Clark. Whose arms are longer? It's a pretty easy question. I think you know the answer to that. Marcus says, morning from London. John says, who's the ref for Ruiz Joshua 2? Do you know? Yes, it's Luis Pabon. A little bit of grumbling from fans given one of his performances several years ago. But in terms of the officials, which off the top of my head was Benoit Roussel. I'm just trying to think. I'd have to have a look at the list. But there's the British guy. there's one neutral, Benoit Roussel. There's Feldman from the United States and Steve Gray from the UK. Coach Qatar says AJ all the way. Jason says Football World Cup in Qatar is a joke. Tony says good morning from the Channel Tunnel, heading from France to the UK. Is there pretty good reception through that tunnel? I've never actually travelled it. I understand it's quite a feat of engineering, obviously being under the water and such, but always wanted to. Arjun says, Boxing Squared, how's it going, mate? Hope all is well. Well, after a 3 hours sleep, I'm feeling pretty chipper. Joseph says, morning from the UK, morning to you too. Johnny Nelson says, Ruiz has longer arms than AJ. Well, Johnny Nelson says a number of things, and I'm not sure all of them are credible. Who can forget the clangor that Tony Bellew is more technical than Alexander Usyk? Give me a break. UK Rob says proper nervous and excited. So that is UK from Mixed Combat Radio. Do check out their channel, great channel. As Unrivaled Boxing Talk and News, he's in the chat too. If you haven't subscribed to him, as well as Mixed Combat Radio, please do so. Good channels. Already starting to fall behind in the chat. It was do a little bit of a scroll and it puts you all out here, but I'll try to catch up before we move on. Tony says, lots of British pundits seem to be backing Ruiz. Well, he did win pretty conclusively the first time. I guess, and this is what we'll come to in my first sort of topic, because I'll touch on this, obviously this main fight, which is all but here. So I'm going to be staying up for, I believe the weigh-in is in about 4.5 hours or so. So after I get off the stream, I've still got to do a few videos. Didn't do any videos today yet so far, so I want to do a couple of final preview and prediction videos. 5 heavyweight fights on the card, as we know. And also, I've been trying to get round to the Makhmudov and Keane fights, which are on in Canada this weekend, which is going to be about 4 or 5 hours after the event ends in Saudi Arabia, in terms of when the fight ends, which is actually not too bad. For me, that will be Sunday afternoon here in New Zealand. But it'll be a busy day. 5 heavyweight fights, which I might not cover the Medvedev Little fight, depending on what happens. But I am wondering about that fight, and I'll get to it, because I didn't like necessarily what I saw in that first fight from Medvedev a couple of months ago, or however long ago it was, his debut fight. But the second one against Little, although Little's not a big puncher, but we'll come to that in a little bit. Marcus says, do you think Medvedev stayed in the amateurs too long? Maybe. I mean, who knows? Some of these guys, though, that are coming through, and if you saw that face-off with Tom Little, he's not a huge heavyweight. And the sort of state of the division today, most of the average-sized heavyweights seem to be 6'2", 6'3", 6'4". And, then obviously you have the tall timber 6'5" and above. And I did think this week, and I'll cover this a little bit later on, Dillian Whyte against Marius Wach, I thought, is he actually 6'3", 6'4", as has been claimed before? For the Parker fight, I remembered thinking, he's smaller than Parker, and Parker's listed at 6'4", but more likely 6'3". But him versus Wach, I thought there's got to be at least 5 inches in terms of the height differential. And we'll come to that fight a little bit later on, because White, and I see Adam Fahey is just mentioning this in the chat, looks about 270. I definitely think he's going to be coming in over 260. I thought the open workout, he did look a little heavy. So UK Rob Boxing says, the Prince is keeping the ring after the fight. Nice souvenir put up in the palace the next day. And I understand the ring's going to be 22 feet instead of what would normally the rings Joshua fights in the UK, 20 feet. So that was something Adam Fahey had passed on to me earlier today via Twitter. Okay, so we're catching up slowly, says... Apparently not. Okay, I just completely failed. Yeah, so Unrivaled Boxing Talk and News says Feldman, Roussel and Steve Gray. And we have Luis Babon as the referee, the third man in the ring. Liam says, you tuning in for the Sioux fight, Boxing Squared? Not sure. I mean, it depends how long this fight goes. I haven't really been paying too much in terms of other events this sort of last 2 weeks or so, because there's been such a thirst for news and other bits and pieces going on ahead of this fight. I almost feel like I'm sort of Joshua and Ruized out in terms of coverage. So I didn't do a video today, and I wasn't intending to in terms of a preview style, but I'm hoping my final video, apart from mentioning it here in the stream, of course, will be the weigh-in video, plus the other undercard ones that I need to get to. Just excuse me, I'll just have a quick drink. Apparently I missed some comments, so I'll just get back to that. So Ruiz odds are shortening. I always thought they were quite wide, actually. I think the value is there for betting is on Andy Ruiz Jr., but I'm not much of a betting man, so I'm not putting any money down on any of the fights. So Heavy D says Ruiz got Pacquiao arms. Victor says AJ will jab and hold all night. Well, that could be part of the strategy to win. Jason says 5 minutes late, morning glory. Arjun says, can we be realistic here, guys, and not be biased? Ruiz has to be the favourite to win this fight. AJ might have the judges and ref on his side, but Ruiz has got this. Well, we shall soon see, and part of the reason I haven't done a final prediction video for this fight is because I just can't make up my mind on who's going to win, because, you know, in the normal run of events, sort of the big man should always beat the smaller man in terms of, you know, if all things are being equal. But I'm not sure all things are equal in terms of, you know, the pros and cons of each fighter here. But some of it comes down to execution and of the game plan, and can Joshua, if he is going to be fighting a more disciplined fight, a bit more conservative, you know, jabbing, you know, maybe putting a couple of the tools away, not hooking as much, trying to give Ruiz less sort of counter opportunities. Yeah, can he be that disciplined through 12 rounds? We've seen a little bit of that before with Joseph Parker, but Parker wasn't really pressuring him much in that fight, so it's not like for like. So I'm really having trouble just, you know, picking on this one, because I think it is such a close fight. It's not only just down to the sort of game plan, it's down to the execution. And we, you know, Nathan Gorman said a few months ago, and this was such a good quote that stuck with me, it's not just that styles make fights, it's performances that make fights. And some of that's, sorry, I got a moth attacking me here. Some of that is just coming down, is going to come down on the night, who, not necessarily who wants it better, but if Joshua can use his height and his reach and some of the natural advantages, he can make it difficult for Ruiz. But if Andy Ruiz can just walk right in, close the distance, no problem, let his hands go, it's going to be a long night for Anthony Joshua. And a lot of people sort of talk about Joshua having, you know, won the opening couple of rounds in the first fight, and this is even before the knockdown. But the thing people don't talk about, and because I went back a week or two ago for some of the coverage that I've, you know, in my build-up coverage, Anthony Joshua was just allowing Ruiz to walk right in those early rounds, and he was getting his punches away. He was looking for counters. He was just throwing combinations. And if he can't give Ruiz Jr. something to think about as he closes the distance, then it's going to be, you know, easy, not easy for Andy Ruiz Jr., but it makes his job a bit easier if he's just able to sort of slide in there, you know, bam, 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 get his shots away, and then obviously if Joshua resets or whatever, moves off, Ruiz can just keep coming in. So Joshua needs to have a good jab. He needs to try to, you know, hit him with something that it's going to make him think twice about coming in. He'll keep coming no matter what, but if Joshua doesn't make it tough for him, then it makes it easier for Ruiz to implement his game plan. It's, yeah, there's so many things with the way this fight could play out, but if a disciplined Joshua can execute a good sort of, even some people will say a boring game plan, it's going to make it tough for Andy Ruiz Jr. But Joshua can't be so negative to the point that he's actually, you know, the rounds are too close to call, and Ruiz Jr. is the champion at the end of the day. You're going to have to beat the champion to take the belt. So, it is such a fascinating fight. Putting aside all the things from the first fight about, you know, obviously the hit to the side of the temple, which, or not, you know, around the ear area, which scrambled his equilibrium. That changed the course of that fight. So I think this is almost a clean slate type of fight. They've obviously been ruminating in recent months about how he's going to beat Ruiz. And Joshua knows he can be hurt by Ruiz, and we can't discount the fact that Ruiz could land a similar type of shot, and I'm sure he'll be looking for it in this rematch. But if Joshua can be disciplined in the way that he fights, you know, similar to an extent to the Tua versus Lewis fight all those years ago, about 20 years ago now, but he's not Lennox Lewis. This is probably not going to look like something we've seen before, though. I think there'll be elements of different fights, and obviously Joshua's been sort of getting some advice from Vladimir Klitschko, and maybe we will see some holding. Maybe we are going to see some Klitschko-esque type tactics, but at the end of the day, for Joshua's purposes, it doesn't matter if it's 7 rounds to 5 by a boring decision. Winning is winning, and he will be hailed by fans for getting his belts back, and if in fact he can get them back. But for Andy Ruiz Jr., I mean, he will need to, he knows what Joshua's going to try to do for the most part, and I think he will adapt and adjust and work off the opportunities that Joshua gives him in there. But it's a fascinating fight for a number of reasons, and I'm sure I've probably just fallen about 30 or 40 comments behind in the period I was just talking about that, but I find it just so hard to call. And I did think in some ways maybe the betting odds were a little disrespectful to Andy Ruiz Jr., because I think this is a fight that if he executes well, he can totally just repeat the dose of the first fight. But a lot of this has sort of come down to, in this build-up, is more what can Anthony Joshua do different? Because obviously, if he does change things and decides not to bang with Ruiz on the inside, because even ahead of that third round, there were a lot of opportunity, a lot of times where Joshua was fighting small and really trying to trade leather with Andy Ruiz Jr. And ultimately, he got caught by something later on, but part of that was him thinking Ruiz was hurt. So yeah, and I'm sure hindsight will be 20/20 with some of the stuff after the fight, that either way which result it goes, people will be saying we should have seen that coming given the first fight, or yada yada yada, whatever. But I'm expecting it's going to be a tough fight. Whoever wins will deserve to have won, and if Ruiz knocks Joshua out again, and if it's earlier, he's going to get praised for the performance, and he truly has arrived in terms of having those belts, keeping them, and then he can sort of write his own ticket about the what next. And Anthony Joshua, it's a redemption story waiting to be written. Ruiz Jr. is going to have a movie about his life made at some point, and it's going to mirror the sort of Rocky sort of storyline, but he fulfilled that that dream, and now he wants to try stop Joshua from writing another movie storyline, which is the redemption, the champion which had taken the titles, was the biggest thing in heavyweight boxing in terms of the cash cow and such, and then being humbled to such an extent, dropped 4 times, beaten up in that fight, and Ruiz Jr. saying that he quit there. If he comes back and wins, I mean, it's either way, whichever way it goes, the storyline is, if you sort of put that into a fiction piece writing about boxing, you'd say, nah, there's, you just never believe it. Okay, so I'll try to get back to the chat here, and we'll see what's going on here. So just taking a drink of water. So this is from a few minutes ago before I started that sort of winding little stream of consciousness chat about Joshua and Ruiz. So Arjun says, Luis Pabon, who allowed Vlad to make love to Pavek in Russia. And when I rewatched that fight last year ahead of the Joshua one, it still amazed me how those throws, and they were throws, and it was very obviously throws, were ruled knockdowns. So I would and I'll touch on the officiating, if there is any sort of hint of funniness, dodginess, whatever you want to sort of call it, if the fix is in, as it were, that would look extremely bad if Joshua got a win under dodgy circumstances. That would actually really take the shine off a win, and I'm sure there would be a number of fans, a lot of fans, even Joshua's fans, if it was under murky circumstances, that would be going in on the officiating. Because what we want to see, and maybe this is just me dreaming here, is a fair fight where the winner comes out on top and you don't have any issue with it. If it's a close fight, it's similar to because there seems to be this whole narrative that's since Ruiz Jr. Beat Joshua, there's a narrative that's sort of risen up that that Ruiz Jr. was completely robbed in New Zealand and he dominated Joseph Parker, which I think if people want to go back and watch that fight, it was an extremely close fight. I myself, and if you follow the channel for any length of time, you'll know that I scored that one as a draw on the night. And Ruiz Jr. afterwards said, at worst, he thought it was a draw, and he thought a draw would have been fair. But that indicates what a close fight it was. And I think robbery certainly is an overused term these days in boxing. But then again, obviously we do see some robberies that take place. One of the judges, and I mentioned this in a video, one of my preview videos this week about fight week activities, Steve Gray, he actually was in that fight, Anthony Crolla fight, judging that just a month or so ago. And he had that to Crolla 98-92. So, yeah, I kind of, when I was just checking out the judges, any recent controversial scoring or anything, I sort of thought, ooh, that doesn't really look that flash. So, but I hope things are above board for this fight, because if it is smeared by the perception that there was some hometown cooking for some sort of result for one fighter either way, it's going to take the shine off it. And I don't think for one of the biggest fights, if not the biggest fight of the year, it doesn't need that. It'd be extremely bad look for boxing with the eyes of the world looking at this rematch. So Unger says, UK Rob, at 22-foot ring, plenty of room to run. Certainly is. So Coach Qatar says Qatar is ready to host the World Cup, world-class facilities. I don't doubt that at all. So Shane says, I bet if AJ gets knocked down, he'll get a long count, a lot of money invested in AJ. Jason says Monday 21 November 2022, Sunday 18 December 2022. I'm not sure what that's in reference to. Is that to the World Cup? Unrivaled Boxing Talk and News says, thanks, Mr. Squared. Victor says, jab, hold, jab, hold, jab, hold. Hey, if that ends up being part of it, because I think he will have to, hold in there at some point if Ruiz gets to the inside and is really banging away. And that one of the first things not a lot of people are talking about the rematch is Andy Ruiz Jr. took the stuffing out of Joshua in the first fight later on, round 6 or so, with body punching. And if he really starts to work Joshua over to the body, he's got to hold. He's really got to try, exert, lean on Ruiz, try to, use that height and reach, push him into the ropes, lean on him. I mean, if he has to use a few tactics to, sap Ruiz, and I'm sure Ruiz will do the same, well, that's boxing. If the referee allows them to push the envelope, well, that's going to be up to the referee to control that action. So John Potter says, Arjun, tell me more about the referee, please, mate. Well, we just covered, I think, just before, so he did officiate that Vlad and Povetkin fight back in 2013, I want to say it was. So Will Race for Food says, hello from Poland. I hope Wok will give good performance tomorrow. I hope so too, because in my view, Marius Wok is sort of long past his best, and in that sort of stage where he's collecting paychecks, hasn't necessarily looked too flash for some time, but I hope he does put up a bit of an effort, and Dillian Whyte does need some rounds. Marcus says, I just feel Ruiz has too much amateur experience under his belt for Joshua, and Ruiz is not coming to the end of his career. He's in the prime, unlike a lot of Joshua's previous opponents. Yeah, some of that narrative I've seen sort of floating around, does sort of discount that Joshua fought Dillian Whyte, Joshua fought Dominic Breazeale, Joshua fought Joseph Parker. Those guys were either under 30 or just 30 or so at the time. So it's not like he's just had guys that were approaching 40 years old for the whole of his career. AA Boxing and Blunt says, Coffee, Blunt and Boxing Squared live stream. What a start to my day. Well, thank you for joining the stream, AA Boxing and Blunts. Heavy D says, you should do a little feature on Mixed Combat Radio, Boxing Beats and Rhymes, Boxing Talk with RD, maybe Hatman. Well, out of those guys, I think the only one I really have any, or the only contact with is Rob from Mixed Combat Radio. We trade a few tweets and other bits and pieces. But yeah, I think a lot of people forget about YouTube is for the majority of boxing, uploaders, it really is a part-time gig that's sort of on the side. So I think in an ideal world, if it was a full-time gig, you could look to explore doing more of those things. But sometimes as well, time zones don't naturally line up as well. I mean, at the moment it's 10 o'clock at night here where I am. Wherever you are around the world and wherever these other channels are based too, I'm sure it's not 10 o'clock PM. So Unger says Keane will have Liakovic twitching again. Yeah, I'll come to that a little bit later as well, because I can't understand why they've actually made that fight. I think some of it comes down to, I'll get to it. I'll just sort of hold that thought. I've just clicked on the chat here and I've gone way down, so I'm just trying to find my place again. But that's one of the topics to cover. But actually, while I'm at it, I'll get one out of the way. So Mihai Nistor, he's turned pro. So you may remember he beat Joshua in 2011. He's 29 years old. He's a smaller heavyweight, turned pro. He's just had his first fight. So this is, just hours ago from when the stream was played. I did retweet the highlights of that. Actually, I'll bring up I think it was a third round stoppage. Just bear with me. So as I said, at BDB, which is BEADYBEA. He tweets a lot of boxing coverage from around the world, like little highlights, etc. So Nistor had his first fight against Christian Maris. I think that might be spelled wrong in the tweet here, but Christian Mariscal, 13-4 journeyman, third round stoppage. Yes, so that's what it was. So I don't know. I mean, it's quite the sort of timing of it. Turning pro and Joshua fight week, probably get a few more people talking about him than if he had have just turned pro, say, a month ago or a month after this. But yeah, I'm not too sure what he will be able to do as a much smaller heavyweight. He's only around about 6'5", he may be. But obviously, that was a sort of style in a fight that he had Joshua's number, and Ruiz of a similar sort of height and build to some extent. So Arjun says, Ruiz is winning the fight. One training camp is not enough for the changes Joshua has to make. Well, we're soon going to see, and there was a piece on Boxing Scene that talked about immediate rematches, and anecdotally, I've seen a lot of people say that, actually, just before I get onto that, I've noticed just for the last 2 weeks, normally on screen would be the chat window, but that seems to be not working. So I can see the chat on the sort of side of my software, but normally it would be coming onto the screen instead of. I think you can only see what's the little jar thing and the little Kevin, whatever that thing is. But normally on the left-hand side, it should be streaming down with the chat. So I have no idea why that's not working. I have to try and figure that out. But apparently it should be, but it's not. But yeah, I digress. But in terms of 6 months and Joshua having the rematch, the sort of the numbers, it's not as great in the heavyweight division as you would have expected. The Boxing Scene article outlined the 10 immediate heavyweight rematches, which was 5 wins to the new champion, 3 wins to the old champion, and 2 draws. So in at least 70% of cases, with the wins and the draws, the new champion kept their belts. But obviously 30%, 3 out of 10, the old champion took their belts back. And a couple of those, obviously, one of those, in terms of immediate rematches, Lennox Lewis. But that article was up it was about 2 days ago or so. But interesting figures, though. I think there's the perception, and I've seen this written a lot, in terms of people saying of rematches, and I think that's other rematches that the new champion will repeat the dose again. But is 6 months, and really it's only 5 months, has that been enough for Anthony Joshua to actually, turn things around? And there's a debate to say, well, how much did he need to turn around? And that's the question, because ahead of the third round knockdown, where his equilibrium was scrambled and he never really recovered, he was doing okay in there and winning some rounds, but there was some stuff that, I didn't necessarily like, and what I just mentioned earlier. Ruiz Jr. was finding his way to the inside easily enough. Joshua was allowing him to get his work away, which is obviously, that's danger signs if that happens again in the rematch. But 6 months or 5 months. One of the other things I think has been not talked about as much, with Joshua saying how effectively he got back into the boxing gym straight away. Even ahead of training camp, he was putting in a lot of hard work. Is there scope that he's overtrained here? It's one of these things that I think you can maybe point to with Tyson Fury, he'd effectively had a couple of years now in terms of just training straight. And I sort of thought he looked pretty flat early on in the Otto Wallen fight, and I wondered if overtraining was part of that because he's just been doing so much. But has he done too much? I mean, how could they effectively manage and monitor him outside of the training camp? Because even though he sort of said, I worked on things, then I knew what I needed to even hone further. So he's talked about the benefits of all the hard work he put ahead of training camp, which was 3 months of really hard slog. So in that context, you kind of go, he had 3 months of really hard work, and then the stuff prior to training camp. It's a question. But we're going to see, I think, on the scale, a slimmed down version of Joshua. You would have seen in the past 24 hours there was a shot that came out. They must have been doing some sort of promotional work. They had a sort of banner up behind them, which I think they're probably going to put some sort of graphic. I think that was to help the graphics. It was some sort of light deflector or something like that. But Joshua certainly did look slim, and I know a lot of people sort of said, "Oh, Joshua's still looking pretty muscled up," but I actually thought he looked more like a boxer. He looked leaner, and he's clearly been doing less weights. And that brings the other question, will the weight loss, will that have any impact, on his chin or anything like that? Anything related to other elements of the fight? How's the stamina going to be? And you'd have to imagine a slightly lean down version of Joshua. He should be ready to go, more ready for 12 rounds of hard action, as opposed to if he's muscled up, gases out, which we've seen before. I mean, there's lots of talking points about this fight, and the different strategies and the potential in-ring performance of both that I know we've all been talking about for so long now, but it's just a couple of short days away, or even less than that, about 36, 40 hours away, whatever it is. So L-Dog says, smash the like button, and apologies if you've left a comment or said hello to me. I'm probably about at least 10 minutes behind on the chat section, so I'll do my best to catch up, but I may have to skip past a few, but we'll try. So Tom says, if AJ wins, Hearn will make the in-house fights for now on. He may never fight Fury and definitely won't fight Wilder. I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think in 2020, whoever's going to have the belts, they're going to have mandatory considerations to take care of. And if they don't, they'll be stripped of a belt. So there is that to be said. I mean, all these arguments about, and I've seen this sort of bubbling up in comment sections, either by Wilder fans or Joshua fans, about either or in terms of, if PBC gets the belts, they're just going to recycle them in-house, or if Joshua and Hearn get the belts, it'll recycle them in-house. If we get in the best fights, some of that doesn't actually, to me, it's not so much of a worry, because if we're getting the best, the biggest, and this doesn't always happen in the heavyweight division, but if we do, I'll be happy. And the thing is, these guys' legacies can't sustain just having ho-hum, fights that people don't want to see. Arguably, the Luis Ortiz rematch with Deontay Wilder was one that probably shouldn't have happened. Still a good fight, it was a good win, but it wasn't one we really needed. I would have rather seen some fresh meat, say like Adam Kovnarski. He may have got knocked out too, but I would have preferred to see a fresh face in a fresh fight. And Deontay Wilder, in terms of his career, he can't really sustain any more sort of ho-hum fights because he's had them already earlier in his championship reign. And Joshua, if he gets his belts back, well, he may have to do a mandatory first in terms of Kubrat Pulev. That's due by the end of May 2020. Pulev has to have a shot, or the winner, or the holder of the belt will get stripped. And I think if it is mandatories next year and they somehow can come to make a deal with the WBO to have Usyk after Kubrat Pulev, who doesn't want to see Usyk versus Joshua? To me, that's a very good fight. But yeah, certainly promotional considerations and elements and the politics of boxing, the silos that are forming, yeah, I see why there is concern, because it's not like we've had the best 2018 in terms of the heavyweight division. The fact that this fight, happened at all in terms of Ruiz taking the belts and we've got this rematch. If Joshua had decided after Jarrell Miller had pulled out or was dumped from the fight against Joshua because of performance-enhancing drugs, and Joshua decided, look, I don't want to take the risk at short notice, he probably would have had Pulev next in terms of a mandatory or whatever. So 2018 could have been a much more boring year if Joshua and Ruiz had never have happened. And just think now, look at it, the situation. We've got one of the most anticipated rematches in the heavyweight division in a long time. It really is. It's sort of, for Joshua's purposes, maybe it wasn't sort of how he imagined his year panning out, but hey, I like the fight, the rematch. There's, like I say, I haven't done a preview and final prediction video in terms of who wins that, because I just keep going back and forth with myself. I just don't know who's going to win, because I can see several scenarios and how it could play out, and this is why I think it's a true 50-50 fight. And I'm not buying any sort of narrative anyone wants to spin me that it's just 80-20 either way. This, depending on the execution and the performance, I can see either guy winning, but it will come down to those little moments. There'll be moments in the fight and you'll identify it as a game changer. And I'm sure those first few rounds, it's going to be, pretty cagey, a bit of a feeling out process. I'm sure Andy Ruiz Jr. and Anthony Joshua don't want to just, charge the other and just walk into something that changes the fight. Because look, that happened the first one, and look how things turned out for Joshua. So it could end up being similar in many ways to the Ortiz and Wilder fight, where it's low volume early on as the feeling out process evolves. But obviously Joshua and Ruiz, they do like to take sort of matters into their own hands and dictate the sort of tone and tempo of the fight. So I think that feeling out process, a couple of rounds before it starts to heat up, and that could be a more sort of sedate pace maybe than the first fight, if Joshua can use his height and his reach, which for a guy that's got, at least listed as 4 inches of reach advantage, height advantage, and 8 inches in reach advantages, he'd be crazy not to use it. He was fighting very small for different stretches in that first fight, and to me, I didn't sort of think that really was something that he should be doing. But I mean, that first one, it's in the books. I think Joshua thought he was going to win it and win it comfortably enough, and it ended up being just a little too much in the end. But yeah, I'm excited. It's going to be a massive sort of heavyweight card. So we get to some of the undercards in a moment. Already been going for 37 minutes, and I'm really only on my first topic, and I did touch on Mihai Nista. So Unrivaled Boxing Talk says, I was thinking Little versus Ed Fountain would be a good fight. Theolemus Lofi says, Marcus, who's better, Polish boxer, Wok or Izu? Or Izu's retired now, so that might be a bit of a moot point. So John says, Boxing Squared, what would be your predictions for all the heavyweight fights on Saturday? That's also, and I'll just quickly get to Patreon, what L-Dog has asked me, predictions for the big fights this weekend. So I will cover this one off now. A little bit thinking that the chat, I'm just going to have to catch up with it as I can, but I'll just start with these predictions, because yeah, this is a big card, and it's going to be a busy morning for me on Sunday morning New Zealand time when the card will be airing. But in terms of Little and Majidov, so I'll start with that fight, because there were a few things in that debut by Majidov that obviously he was dropped in that fight, got up and ultimately went on to win. Just makes me think, does Tom Little have a shot in this fight, albeit a slim one? Because he is the opponent. Majidov is the fancied fighter to win that one. Not sure what the odds are. I'm sure it's probably stacked heavily in favour of Majidov. And, Magomedrasov Majidov, very talented amateur, but sometimes that doesn't count for much in the pros. And a lot of amateurs have turned professional, and sometimes, slightly different sort of kettle of fish to the amateurs. So who knows? I mean, Little himself has been whipping himself into possibly the best shape of his career. Has to be said, he's looking a lot better than he has. But I guess, Little doesn't necessarily have, dynamite in his hands or anything like that. I don't think, Majidov is going to be worried about what's coming back at him in terms of the power. But yeah, I mean, if there is some openings and Little, he can box a bit, maybe he can make it interesting, but it will still be a loss. I mean, I'm picking Majidov to win that one, but it might be one of those ones where there could be a little bit of drama just somewhere in that fight. Okay, so what's the other one? So Majidov and Little will probably be the first heavyweight fight, and then it will be Eric Molina and Filip Hrgovic. And Eric Molina has been talking mad greasy stuff about Hrgović this week, in terms of he's basically fought no one and he's never felt power like his, and some of the things that you would expect Molina to say, a guy who was a former 2-time title challenger, but certainly, pretty seasoned by now, well at the back end of his career. He's been somewhat inactive, and some of that's been down to he had a ban in the UK, although he may not have fought in the UK, but I think some of that sort of stuff is, the perception around it probably hasn't helped his career. But he is able to fight now. That UCAD ban, I think, ran out because he got an extra month sort of popped on because he sparred Joseph Parker in 2018. I think it was for the White fight. So they ended up giving him an extra ban on the 2 years that they'd given him for an extra month, which ran out, I think, like a week or so ago. But in terms of that fight, Molina himself, I did think at the open workout, he looked like he was in slightly better condition. And he's sort of spoken about having 8 weeks for training camp, and normally he doesn't get that much, yada, yada, yada. But for me, I think that's not going to matter. Whatever Eric Molina's been doing in training camp, I think it will all be for naught. I think Filip Hrgović is going to come in here and get a decent looking win, probably by stoppage. If it goes, more than 4 rounds, I'd be surprised. I think Filip Hrgović definitely has the power and the skills to be a real nightmare for Eric Molina. So I think this is going to end badly for Molina. But what I will be doing, and this will be after the, hopefully, my sort of plan is after the stream, I'll finish off a couple of, I've got to start them, but I'll aim to finish them off as well. Sort of final preview and prediction videos, and then I'll be catching the weigh-in, which I think is about 2 a.m. my time. So I want to get a few final preview and prediction videos out, and I'll probably leave my Dillian Whyte one over till after the weigh-in because I want to see what he comes in at in terms of his weight, because I'll get to that fight now, because Whyte, I expect Whyte to win. It's it's not necessarily a tick over, but it's pretty close to that. At this point in his career, Mariusz Wach is pretty shot. And I don't necessarily think that he's going to have enough to give Dillian Whyte any real problems. If you caught any of his recent fights, he's looked dreadful in some of them. Although against Artis Bilka, I actually had him winning that fight, but let's face it, Artis Bilka's pretty shot as well, and now he's gone down to cruiserweight. So, but in terms of Whyte, if he could, because Wach is still durable, even though he's a faded force, maybe Whyte can really make a statement if he could knock the guy out, connect with a left hook at something. But I think it's more likely to go several rounds and maybe a stoppage on his feet or something like that, similar to the Martin Bacoli win, which, I mean, Bacoli, when he fought him, he really sort of just knocked Wach around the ring. In the end, it had to be stopped because just nothing really coming back. But if you think back just 2 or 3 years ago, even then, Mariusz Wach wasn't really putting up too much in other efforts. Say against Jarrell Miller, didn't really do too much in that one. Ultimately pulled out with an injury. What was it, hand or arm or something like that. But that was a fight where effectively Jarrell Miller just walked forward and just, battered him, not with huge punches, but as we know, Jarrell Miller just grinds people into the dust with his volume. What's the next fight on the card? Povetkin and Hunter. This could be the best fight of the night. I'm expecting that, this one is going to be a real interesting first 6 rounds, because I'm picking Hunter for this one. Simply because I think he's the younger, fresher man. I think if he can get past 6 wins, he either gets a stoppage on Povetkin, but more likely a decision. So my pick is Michael Hunter. But if Povetkin can catch Hunter in those early rounds, well, he certainly has the power and the tools to stop him. And this has the potential to be the fight of the night. It'll be interesting to see how it sort of plays out, because Michael Hunter does gamble in there with some of what he does. He can be open to being hit. I mean, there were opportunities that Sergey Kuzmin could have and should have taken, but just couldn't. But he did manage to tag Michael Hunter when he was being a little bit sloppy a couple of times, where he'd throw a combination, not get out of range, and sort of, gloves down, and got caught, clipped a couple of times, but he was able to sort of take it. But if Povetkin, even at 40 years old, he's still dangerous and you can't discount him. But I do think after 6 rounds, there is now, because I think we've seen in some of the recent fights, he has started to fade. Even in that Huey Fury win just, 3 or 4 months ago, whatever it was a pretty low volume fight, and Povetkin was visibly tiring and gassing in that fight. Huey Fury just couldn't actually just string his punches together to make it work to try and get anything over Alexander Povetkin. It was a pretty comfortable win to Povetkin in the end, but it was a low volume fight and he was still gassing late on. So, I think if Hunter can get out of those first sort of, 5, 6, 7 rounds, I think he will end up starting to take over as the fight wears on. And that's why I could see it going to a decision. So it could be quite even in those first half a dozen rounds, a lot of back and forth. And but it wouldn't surprise me if Hunter is caught with something and even hurt in those early rounds. But I think if Povetkin loses this one, he's probably retiring. But I guess you can never say never. There's money to be made in the heavyweight division at the moment, and everyone loves the dollar, that's for sure. And the main fight, like I say, it's the way it pans out is just dependent on the execution at the end of the day. We think, we're pretty confident what we think Josh will come in with his game plan and what Ruiz will look to do. But I just keep going back and forth, and that's why I haven't done a final preview and prediction video. I'm going to do a video from the weigh-in talking about that sort of stuff, but I just don't know who's going to win that fight. All the other fights, I'm pretty confident in my picks. That one, not so much. Because what if there is a moment where Ruiz clips him and Joshua starts going into his shell, having a few nightmares from the first fight sort of rear up and influence the way that he fights? Something like that could totally happen. But maybe there will be a moment of the fight that will galvanize Joshua, a moment of success, and you see the confidence come on. He gets that sort of, I can do this, I've got this type look. I could totally see it being back and forth, both having success, both being hurt, and that's what happened in the first fight. It really is an intriguing fight for a number of reasons. But I know the betting odds, as people are saying, have been shortening. But I guess that was always going to happen with the value that seemed to be there for a Ruiz win. Because even though it seems to me at least to be a 50-50 fight, the money had been on Joshua to regain his titles, and Ruiz was, I think in some of the local odds here in New Zealand, was at about $3 for the win or something like this, or $3.50 for the win, and this is just a couple of days ago. And if I was thinking, if I was to bet on that, you'd go for the value. And considering it's a 50-50 fight, if you put $10 down, you get 35 back. That's a pretty decent sort of return. And this is why the odds, I think, will be shortening as well. But I did see something that, I think it might have been a tweet from Boxing Talk with Adi, where he was talking about at the hotel, the fight hotel, with other media and other bits and pieces, seemed to be a lot of people were picking Ruiz to repeat the dose. And I've seen predictions all over the place which have talked about who's going to win and why, and different fighters, that sort of thing, from previous fighters, that is. And there's no real consensus that I can see. It's not like 90% think Ruiz is going to win, 10% for Joshua. It's split all over the board, and even how the result might pay out. Who knows? Maybe we will see a dominant Anthony Joshua. Maybe he can come back, and if he did that, that would certainly be, I think that would, in terms of his profile worldwide, so many eyes being on this, it would help his story and stardom. But if Ruiz Jr. repeats the dose, similarly dominant in the second fight, well, his star just increases again. And what happens next? Well, that's going to be the interesting thing. But we'll leave that till after the fight, because it's got to see how this plays out now. It's one of these things where there's almost too much talking that's been done now. It feels like it's just been so much of a build-up. But from the moment that the rematch was confirmed, all those months ago, and then you had the press tour start and the training camp 3 months ago, almost feel like I'm talked out on this whole thing. And it's, the waiting is I'm excited about this fight. I know a lot of people, either way, they're just looking forward to this fight, this card in general. And in terms of the undercard, maybe it's outside of the Povetkin Hunter fight. Those other 3 fights maybe not as competitive on paper as people would like, but still, it's a good and stacked heavyweight card overall. I don't have any complaints about it. Obviously, there's been grumblings in the United Kingdom with the pay-per-view price going up £5. And I have noticed people have sort of said, oh, it's because Dillian Whyte's on the card. But he's fighting an undercard fight. He's going to be third on the bill. He's not going to be getting a massive payday. So I think it's all about making money. This is what all these entities like Sky and Matchroom are in boxing to do. It's a fight game, and it's a business after all. They're looking to clip the ticket, and if it doesn't go Joshua's way, well, they made as much money as they could while they could. So Ramex27 says Wok is like the 10th wonder of the world. Sid Master says, hello Boxing Squared from West Africa, your channel is dope. Well, thank you for saying so. Thank you for joining the channel. Just over 100 in the chat at the moment. I gotta say, I'm probably about 20-30 minutes behind on the comments, but I'll do my best to catch up. We got through, just in that last 10 minutes or so, a decent chunk of my list in terms of the fights, and obviously I'll get down to your comments and reactions to that. Actually, I'll just have a look at my list. I guess one of the other things connected to the main fight and the undercard fights as well, and I'll get to this when I can in the chat because clearly I'm very far behind, but who wins and why for all these fights? Interested in your predictions on this. In particular, the main fight. What's going to happen? What do you think is going to unfold? Let me know here. And my list as well. Oh, we've got the Wilder pay-per-view stuff, but I'll come to that a little bit later on, as well as the Arslanbek Makhmedov fight and Simon Keane. Yeah, those are pretty much the other two big issues on the on my list. And I did note that the WBO convention is happening, and David Higgins is trying to lobby for Joseph Parker. He's fourth in the rankings at the moment, trying to lobby for him to be a little bit higher, which I think is obviously because he wants to try sew up any potential fight for a WBO title. Should the WBO title be dropped, that would obviously fall to Alexander Usyk, the WBO mandatory, to fight the next highest guy, which on the face of it, if say Joshua loses, for example, he drops out of the rankings and Ruiz drops that belt and Tyson Fury's tied up with Deontay Wilder, then Parker's the next cab off the rank. But they just want to squeeze him up a little bit higher. And part of the rationale that's been used by David Higgins is because Parker previously beat Andy Ruiz Jr. But not sure that reasoning really that was a win 3 years ago. Does it need to carry too much weight now? I don't know. John says Wok is 6'8", probably Dillian 6'2", 6'2.5". Yeah, possible. I definitely thought the height differential it looked a little bit comical actually, but that's not going to stop Dillian Whyte winning that fight. So Scott says, jab the like button, boys and girls. 55 in the chat and 11 likes. Yes, please do. So that comment was probably about 20 minutes ago. I think we're just over 100 in the chat in the moment. If you can smash that like button, much appreciated. So Ananiel EB says, do you think Ruiz won the match by capitalizing over AJ, or is it just the third round concussion that led to AJ's defeat? Well, it was clearly a big part of it, but Joshua was hanging in there, but some of it in the end, the body shots did really do a number on Joshua in that 6th round. But I think a lot of people forget the earlier part of the fight. It was competitive, but some of the things that Joshua in this rematch will be looking to not do is allow Ruiz just to walk in, and that was happening in those first couple of rounds. Go back and watch the first 2 rounds of that fight, and even part of the third before that equilibrium shot. There were several times where Ruiz literally just sort of waltzed into range and just letting his punches go, and it was just Joshua and him were just trading. So some of that is needs to obviously be tweaked for this rematch. Whether it can 5 months in terms of that turnaround, we'll see. So Ty ZHD says, Boxing Squared, have you watched the public workouts? What did you make of it? It's really hard to take too much from the public workouts in terms of what they may or may not do in the fight, but just because it's more of a promotional tool, part of fight week activities, it's a way to connect with fans and the audience. It's a promotional vehicle. But I did think that Joshua certainly did look trimmer, and who knows what he's going to weigh in at. I originally sort of thought for this fight, after the way, I thought Josh would try to make adjustments and look to fight, it'd be maybe 240, 242. But in terms of having seen him and how lean he looks, all the time that he said he spent in the gym, it hasn't been about trying to lose weight. It's just his weight is a result of what he's been doing of his training and doing more gym work as opposed to lifting weights. Maybe it will be somewhere in the high 230s. I mean, it would sort of shock me if it ended up being something like 235. So Heavy D says, what time is the fight on your side of the world? Well, I believe in the UK, ring walk is 8:45 p.m, so it will be 9:45 a.m. ring walk in New Zealand, Sunday morning. Which for me, that's a perfect time, but the card's probably going to be started about 6 or 7 a.m. New Zealand time, so I'll have to get an early night, which would be tomorrow night. So UK Rob says the ring in Madison Square Garden was 22 feet also. Okay, I didn't know that. Andrew says AJ didn't look right last time. Mr. David says, guess who is flying out to Saudi this afternoon for the fight? Oh, that's awesome. Have a great time there, Mr. David. L-Dog says, come on, you freeloaders. There are 60 people watching and only 20 likes. If you can, smash that like button. Much appreciated. UK Rob Boxing was Joshua's choice in the first fight and Ruiz's choice this time. The ring size was in the contract. Scott70, thanks for putting me on. Part of that word is cut off, chalk. Not sure what that's about. Marcus says, I just can't vision Ruiz being hit and stumbling all over the place. He takes punches way too well for that. Joshua, on the other hand, I think one of the things that's often forgotten is Ruiz was dropped in the first fight, so it's not like Joshua doesn't have the power to drop him. And although Ruiz may not have been all over the place, we can't say that he wasn't hurt to some extent. Ruiz is a guy, I think, even if he was hurt, he would disguise it. But if this does go later in the fight and Joshua is executing a good game plan, there's nothing to say that he can't actually hurt Ruiz and drop him and stop him. There's been plenty of other examples where guys who've had good chins, never been down, that sort of stuff, and their sort of iron chin is sort of talked about as one of the factors of their sort of hallmark of their career. Remember Luis Ortiz the first time with Deontay Wilder, all the people that were gassing him up saying that he couldn't be dropped, the iron chin, but ultimately he went down. So, who knows? That was the first time that Ruiz was dropped in his career, so Joshua certainly has the potential to do it again. And if the fight goes late and Ruiz is starting to tire, and this is the thing, if it goes deeper into the fight and Ruiz does start to tire and gas, there's more chance for the heavier handed Joshua to actually hurt him. I have to bear that in mind. So Tunde says, don't believe AJ will hold all night. I believe he will fight normal and wait for the right moment. I think he will fight somewhat similar to he does normally, but there will be more of a focus on using his jab and trying to keep Ruiz at range, trying to use his height and reach advantages, which he didn't really do in the first fight. So Adam says AJ looks nervous. Angus says, L-Dog says, what is interesting is Joseph Parker says AJ is going to win the rematch and JP has been 12 rounds with both of them. Yeah, if you've seen some of the predictions from current fighters, previous fighters, they're all over the map. So I find it hard to put too much stock into the predictions. I think we know this is going to be a good fight. That's what we can say at this point. Jason says Ruiz may have 25 to 30 pounds on AJ come weigh-in. AJ is taller, not bigger. Well, maybe not in mass, but he is the taller man, and he does have the longer reach. So Tyzy HD says, does anyone else have the feeling that this is going to be a historical night of boxing? Well, let's hope so. It's been a pretty, turgid 2019, I should say, for the heavyweight division. Just not nearly enough big fights, and even apart from this card this weekend, which I'm sure some promoters would have been looking to stay away from, not a lot of action in the heavyweight division. Even before and after this weekend, it's, in recent months, you may be getting one decent fight, good fight per month. It just seems to be a lot of heavyweights are sitting around idle, not doing too much, which is disappointing for heavyweight boxing fans, that's for sure. So AA Boxing and Blunt says, did anyone think when AJ knocked Ruiz down the uppercut before the hook was a foul punch? He held Ruiz's head as he uppercutted. Sean says, AJ has lost so much weight, so can he move? Do you think this is the right tactic? Keeping Ruiz with a stiff jab, Vlad style, might have been the better option. Well, I think some of that is going to be what Joshua is going to have to do. He's going to have to work that jab. He can't just let Ruiz just waltz on in and get his work away, because that's not going to end well for him. But yeah, I mean, there's been much said about Ruiz's weight for this fight, but Joshua's, I'm more of the view that he needed to be a little bit less bulky. And some of that's going to help with some of his stamina, some of his quickness potentially, and his flexibility. And he has looked good at lower weights, like 242 for the Parker fight, 243 for Brazil. If he comes in just slightly, under 240, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And it signals that he's looking to box Ruiz and ready to go 12. And if that's what it takes, and if it's, a war of attrition over 12 rounds, well, Joshua seemingly looks prepared to, ready for that. Jay Shine says, Texas checking in, listening, 2:48 a.m. in the morning. Good show, Boxing Squared. I have Ruiz TKO in 6 rounds. What do you think? That would be quite a statement if it is another sort of stoppage, and even faster than the first one. Ruiz, he would get a lot of hype and shine from that sort of performance. James says, I love you, brother. Thank you for that. Weight predictions. Yeah, Ruiz, it's quite interesting because he initially said, and I truly believe he was thinking that he would want to get down to this weight. He said he wanted to go down to 245. He said he'd be unbeatable at that weight. And we know ahead of training camp, and I think this is one of the things that got lost in the shuffle, and now people are saying Ruiz has lost no weight. It's kind of not the case. What happened after the win? He put weight on, obviously enjoying himself, and a lot of fighters do put on weight after their fights because they're out of training camp and they're just sort of maybe enjoying themselves and then don't have a fight scheduled, yada yada yada. But it's clear that he was somewhere in the high 280s or 290s, something like that, and he needed to lose weight just to get back down to the 268 he was for the first fight. So he has actually lost a lot of weight, but that's just to get back to where he was. And then he sort of changed from the 245, it was just a few weeks ago, sort of saying around 260. And his trainer at that point, Manny Robles, had said he'd already at that point lost about 30 pounds or so, which kind of confirmed he was somewhere there or thereabouts around 290 entering camp. So I'm sure he's really had a tough, hard camp, and Robles has really sort of whipped him into the sort of shape that they want him to be in. But in fight week, he's sort of finessed it to be he's probably going to be about the same. But if he's heavier than 268, I actually think that would be a bit of a concern, and I guess that'll sort of fall out of this weigh-in, because if he was more than that, that would sort of indicate to me that maybe the cardio and the stamina could potentially be an issue later in the fight. I mean, remember the first fight with Joshua and Ruiz. That was the highest weight Andy Ruiz Jr. had weighed in for about 4 or 5 years. So it wasn't necessarily his normal weight, 268. He's sort of been more around the 260-ish. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what they tip the scales at, which that weigh-in's roughly in about 3 hours and 22 minutes according to my clock. Boxing Squared versus Hatman on DAZN. I think Hatman, with his sort of boxing pedigree, if you've listened to his channel for any length of time, he boxed a lot in terms of earlier in his life, and a lot of gym time. I mean, when I was a teenager, I was in a boxing gym doing some sparring and training and that sort of stuff. That's the extent of my boxing history compared to Hatman, who's really put in a lot of time and effort. I'd probably get hammered. Arjun says, and I think he's 6'2" or 6'3", I'm just on 6 foot, so yeah, no, that wouldn't work out well for me at all, I don't think. So Arjun says, when you're punching down, you lose a little power, and Andy slips the jab, comes over with the right very well. His skill and speed is going unnoticed. unnoticed. I don't think it's going unnoticed at all. I mean, everyone's seen what he was able to display, and he's a very good counterpuncher. And some of it for me about this fight, for Joshua at least, is he's got to take some of those opportunities away for the counter. I mean, I personally think, he should be looking to hook less. They always say don't hook with a hooker, and Ruiz Jr., that's one of his better punches, and I just think if he can be a bit more judicious, this is Joshua with it, reduce those counter opportunities, that's going to help him. So if he has to do, jab, then a 1-2 or tie up, whatever, and he keeps it simple, that could be a good plan. But it's a fight, anything could happen. If Ruiz starts to pressure him and it starts to wear Joshua down, it could devolve into a shootout, or who knows. I mean, and it wouldn't surprise me if we see Joshua catching Andy Ruiz Jr. I mean, you talked about punching down, but what about punching up in terms of those uppercuts? That was an effective punch that helped lead to that knockdown that first fight. So L-Dog says, I don't think that applies to AJ in regards to taking the belt from the champion. Well, we'll soon see. Hopefully the scoring, like I say, is going to be on the level. So L-Dog says, Hatman has to release his B sample. Jason says, AJ 238, Ruiz 265. Yeah, that could be there or thereabouts. UK Rob says, 239, 269. Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be somewhere around in that window. But there was that photo I referenced it earlier in the stream. Joshua, for some sort of promotional activity in the past 24 hours, you saw, with the shirt off, he's definitely looking leaner, still heavily muscled, but nowhere near as much as usual. He looked like he's got more of a boxing physique than the weightlifter physique that he's been criticised for in the past. And Ruiz, I actually thought he didn't look too bad. I did think he was maybe sucking in his stomach, but he did that at the weigh-in last time, so I expect to see that again as well. So Boxing Squared, who do the fans in New Zealand favour? Is there a clear fan favourite of the two? It's one of these things, like boxing is a really niche sport in New Zealand. It really is. Outside of Joseph Parker, some people might know who Anthony Joshua is because Parker fought him and that sort of stuff, but there's a number of people that I've spoken to this week who were unaware that the rematch was happening. So I think in terms of boxing countries and where boxing is more of a following, I think there's a lot of buzz in those areas. But in New Zealand, not so much this week. I was just talking to a couple of people earlier today who were like, "Oh, is that this weekend? Oh, I'll watch that. What channel's that on?" And I said it was pay-per-view, and they were like, I might watch it the next day. So I don't know if there's really a lot of buzz in New Zealand for this fight, but I know in general, especially for boxing fans, the boxing community, and in some of the, I'm sure, I'm not in the UK, but I'm sure there's a lot of people talking about that fight this week. So James says, I think Ruiz will crack him with a left hook to the liver. One of the things that I talked about in my 10 things to watch for video, which I must have put out, must be the best part of 6 or 7 weeks ago now, is body punching. That could really pay dividends again for Andy Ruiz Jr. If he can get inside, work the body. We saw that really take the stuffing out of Joshua in that first fight. Excuse me. So James says, I think Ruiz will... we just read that one. AJ is now super sensitive to the left hook up top. Well, if he is being more diligent, getting his hands back up, the body's going to be there. And that might be just something for Joshua to take advantage of. So Unrivaled Boxing Talk and News says Ruiz 259, AJ 239. Yeah, I just wonder about, with Ruiz having said he might be actually 267, 268, his words, this was from earlier in the week, maybe he will. And maybe it's a mind game. Maybe it will be around 260. I mean, that was what he was saying a couple of weeks ago, what Manny Robles was saying. But he just sort of slightly changed his tune this week about his weight. Maybe with this, because they've clearly been trying to hold his weight at a certain level, around 260. Maybe in the past week or so he's sort of tapered, come off some of those hard workouts that he has put a few extra pounds on. Certainly has happened to Joshua before, the Takam fight being an example. So GG Allen says, imagine David Tua versus AJ. I think David Tua, he would do very well in this era of heavyweight boxing. So L-Dog says AJ will come in between 240 and 238. Manuman666, Boxing Squared, best boxing channel out there. Thank you very much, Manuman666. So we've got 100 in the chat. Thank you for joining the live stream. I sort of hate to think how far behind on the comments I am, but I am trying to catch up. We'll get to my other couple of topics on my list a little bit later on. We've already covered quite a bit of ground. 1 hour, 9 minutes into the stream. I always say I'll try to go for about an hour, but it always seems to just blow out to 2 hours, 2 hours and a half. So we'll see where we get to. In terms of the Joshua and Ruiz fight, it kind of feels like it's almost all talked out, all played out. The only real interest, the only thing left that we don't know, we will soon know with the weigh-in. What are they going to come in at? I'm sure there will be maybe the odd surprise, but I'll be staying up for that, do a video, and hopefully get that out probably about 3 or 4 a.m. my time, but we'll see. So Shane says, AJ has no power in this fight now. Gonna try and jab and hold, but won't work. Also, he might be lighter, but I haven't seen no speed yet. Also, Ruiz has quicker legs now. Well, I think Ruiz Jr.'s always had quick hands, but his feet don't necessarily sort of work at the same rate. And I don't necessarily I'm not sure I agree that he's got quicker legs now. I think he'll still have that same hand speed, and that will be used to his advantage. And that was certainly one of the things from the first fight, that he couldn't actually, Joshua was sometimes struggling to deal with the speed and see where the punches were coming from. But I guess him having guys like Andrew Tabiti, a cruiserweight with a lightning fast hand speed, that was in training camp, and he's had Timothy Moten. He's had about 8 sparring partners that we know of, others being Bryant Jennings, Derek Chisora, Hussein Muhammad. There's others as well. Tom Little, he's been there. There's a mixture of sparring partners, which, you know, I heard Robert McCracken talking about in an interview with the BBC how they would try to replicate Ruiz's styles. I'm not sure how some of those guys would, obviously the hand speed or the lack of it being an issue, but someone like Andrew Tabiti, I wonder what sort of, because I think there's certain activities, and you would have noticed this before, the more you practice them at a higher speed, I mean, even something like driving, when you peel along at 100 k's an hour, after a while it seems like a slower speed. And maybe the weeks of working with some of these guys like Tabiti is going to help him in the hand speed front. But I guess in the end of the day, sparring is sparring. It's not exactly like for like with a fight, although they try to replicate the conditions. And they say it's been tough and hard, and Joshua's been taking blows to the body, arms, shoulders, head, all that sort of stuff. It's going to be interesting to see, how he actually fares in this fight. Can he cope with the speed? Because that was one of the advantages he never really quite, dealt with in that first fight. So L-Dog says, if AJ wins, Ruiz will be called a fluke. If Ruiz wins, AJ will be called a hype job, who was never that good anyway. Welcome to boxing. Yeah, that would be a really bad outcome, because I see some of, Joshua's detractors who say that, he's a hype job and he's never done anything in the sport, but then they're praising Andy Ruiz Jr. But how could you praise Ruiz Jr. if you're calling Joshua nothing? The mentality, it doesn't make any sense to me. Both of these guys are quality fighters. They have quality wins on their resume. So whoever wins this deserves praise. I mean, maybe not bow down to their feet sort of praise. I sort of thought that was going a little bit over the top. But in terms of, the winner deserves a lot of credit. And if it's a hard, tough fight, even the loser would deserve credit as well. And just because, say, for example, if Joshua lost this fight, it doesn't detract from the success that he's had in his career and what he's done. He's had a very good career, and he's made a lot of money, and he's got a lot of big wins on his resume. And if Ruiz Jr. gets the job done again, well, having 2 wins over Anthony Joshua, that is quite a feat considering the sort of fighters Joshua had fought before, and obviously either knocked out or, in the case of Joseph Parker, took him to a decision. James says, can AJ really become a step back counter fighter in 6 months? Well, I don't really necessarily think he's going to be just exclusively looking for counters. He will be utilizing movement more, but I don't necessarily see him doing a Huey Fury around the ring either. So Shane says, okay, talking to other people here. Speaking of movies, absolutely criminal Vinny Paz was voted into the Hall of Fame. I actually haven't. I've been trying to find that movie, Bleed for this, but I haven't been able to find a copy of it. So I've been trying to watch that for the last couple of years, actually. James says, Ruiz with the left hook to the liver, man, calling it. Could be a very good punch for him. Scott says, Unger, decent flick though. Unrivaled boxing talk and news. Povetkin vs. Klitschko was disgusting. Mr. Max says, who knows, he became Olympic champ in 3. John Potter, may not happen in his next few fights, but once people stop disrespecting AJ's power, then he hasn't got a lot of to fall back on, and his career will genuinely be over. That's how I see it. John says, dodgy refereeing hasn't had any effect on Katie Taylor, who got absolutely clear as day actual physical beating. I did think that Pursoon fight was, I didn't like that decision, that's for sure. Adam says, AJ is up 2 on the cards already. L-Dog says, Joseph Parker beat Ruiz in my opinion. Ruiz Parker was 50-50. Yeah, I mean, as I was alluding to earlier, and this is why these comments are here, geez, that must have been about 25-30 minutes ago, so apologies if you've written a comment and I haven't got to the comment yet. Yeah, I didn't see that as a robbery, and there seems to be some sort of narrative that's cropped up, and I think it's from people who haven't watched the fight, or have either watched it with, goggles on, because they want to believe that Ruiz was robbed. It was a close fight. It could have gone either way. Scott 70, 80 in the chat, 27 likes. Use your jab, folks. Yes, please, if you can smash that like button, much appreciated. So Unger says Steve Gray already gave AJ 10-7 for the ring walk. Ruthless. Well, hopefully, like I say, it's going to be above board here. Jason says, biggest fight of the decade. Is it? Is it though? If this was in January, you could certainly claim that. I think there's been other fights that maybe not with so much on the line, I want to say, because this is obviously 3 belts. It's a big rematch. There's a lot of storylines with this. But, I mean, Floyd Mayweather was involved in some really big fights. That Floyd-Pacquiao fight was pretty big. I mean, what was it, 4.6 million pay-per-views or something ridiculous? So Buzz Lightyear says, Ruiz had the element of surprise first fight. AJ is now aware. Ruiz took heavy shots on the way in to counter AJ. It wasn't slick boxing. AJ this time will be expecting those counters. And yeah, Ruiz did take some heavy shots, and he did take some of Joshua's best, which, he backs his chin, and it held up in that first fight. Could be another key for Andy Ruiz Jr. in the second fight. So Lee Craft, aka TBK, the first says hello, all hello to you. Black Templar, I'm feeling AJ for the win now. L-Dog, agree with everything you just said. Okay, I can't go back in the chat and read that, or I'll just have to take it that was something constructive. So Moore says, true fans will not respect AJ if he wins under murky circumstances, period. I would hate to think a spectacle like this would be marred by that, but Mick says, rumours are AJ's under 17 stone. I would have to, hold on, I'll get the calculator out here. Because in New Zealand, I mean, some people, we are on the metric system. So for boxing, obviously everyone always talks in pounds or stones, but mostly pounds in terms of weight. So 17 times 14, that's 238. So under 17 stone, so under 238 pounds. If it was, that's. I'm sort of thinking my original pick, as I was mentioning earlier, was somewhere between 240 to 242, but now seeing Joshua in fight week, maybe 238 to 240, but who knows what the sort of rest and recovery sort of period, and Joshua's been eating, getting some energy back and trying to feel his best for the fight. He may have put on a pound or two. We'll have to see what happens on the scale in a few hours. So Hayden says Joshua didn't win one round. Shush. Okay, that's your opinion. Timothy Thomas says, good morning, Boxing Squared. Mild grey, rain and traffic on a UK London morning. Traffic. I hate traffic, so I feel for you there. L-Dog says, Ruiz had a beautiful jab and right hand to the body. Big Boys Boxing, sub team, hope everyone is well. That is Big Boys Boxing, formerly Kiwi Box. He has shifted channel, so if you haven't resubscribed to his new channel, Big Boys Boxing, please do so. Double A Boxing and Blunts, AJ's weight will be the same minus his balls and heart. Well, he was 247 for that first fight, so he's definitely coming in less than that in my opinion. Okay, I've just accidentally skipped past about 200 comments, so I'll try to find where I was. I can't promise it. I may just have to way behind here. Wow, there's just so many comments. Struggling. Okay, I've gone so far up the chat, I can't go any further, so the limit of comments must have been reached that I can't get back. So I'm just going to have to start here. So Angus says, or Argus says, prediction on the upcoming Zerafa versus Horn fight. Repeat, Zerafa wins. Hopefully, though, because he was sparring that guy who died, that hasn't taken something from him. But that first fight, Michael Zerafa looked pretty good, so yeah, I would predict that he would win that again. What is the fight price around the world? Here it is $25. Actually, I need to check that because the UK price is more expensive. I haven't double checked if they put it up in New Zealand. Normally what happens is it's $34.95, so I'm just going to be looking at this now. Oh, still $34.95, which I think is roughly about £17, something like that. 16, 17 pounds. I'd need to do the conversion, but yeah, it's probably cheaper than the UK. Actually, I will do the conversion. Oh, it's literally £1 to £2 New Zealand dollars, so that makes it easy. So yeah, it's $34.95, so what's that, roughly $17.50. Getting back to the chat. Dillian looks heavy and out of shape. Actually, that was something I was meant to have talked about before. I did think at the open workout he was looking a little bit more portly than usual. So I know Adam Fahey, he's been sort of saying he thinks that he's going to be roughly 270. So I mean, that wouldn't shock me. I mean, there was the Malcolm Tan fight he had after the Derek Chisora fight. So he fought Chisora back in 2016, the end of that year. And then he had Malcolm Tan in the August of 2017. It was a bit of not a great year for him, trying to get some fights. Didn't have a lot of momentum. And he was 260-ish. And I think he looks heavier now than he did for that fight. So maybe it will be 265, 270. So Jim Davis says 3 boxers on the card that have beaten Joshua. Or that he's beat. Sam says people are straight haters and biased. AJ is the reason heavyweight boxing is hot. He's a reason for it. He's not the sole reason, but he's certainly given some energy to the sport, especially, I would say, in the United Kingdom. Hayden says Kovalev number 2, including the paycheck. Not sure what that's in response to, but if, you know, one example of a rematch that I saw recently, which was the Kovalev versus Elidia Alvarez rematch at the start of this year, a lot of people didn't think Kovalev could go back and make adjustments and do, you know, get a decision or a win over Alvarez, given he was knocked out and didn't look great in that first fight. But he did turn it around. So it can happen, but as I went through the stats earlier, in rematches, immediate rematches in the heavyweight division, it's 5 wins to the new champion, 3 losses. The old champion 3 times has regained their belt, and 2 draws. So 70% of the time, the 5 wins and the 2 draws, the new champion has held on to their belt. So there is a little bit of history against Joshua, but obviously 3 people have reclaimed their title, so it's there for Joshua. I'm sure Andy Ruiz Jr. doesn't want him to become the 4th. So Adam says he's got Hrgovic 1-3, White and Povetkin 1-6. Todd says, I think Josh will try to take control of this fight. He'll be aggressive but controlled. His body language is very aggressive. This is retribution for him. I think he will grow in confidence in the fight if he has early success, that if he is, because he is a fighter that likes to dictate the pace, and the tempo, the range. But if Ruiz disrupts some of that, well, who knows what can happen. Scott says 101 in the chat. Hit the like button if you like it. Yes, please. Boxing Squared, Barry Hearn even wanted Joshua to take 16 months off to prepare. 16 months. See, I don't, I know there have been some people saying he needed to take it off and, have a few 10-rounders and, etc. I think, this was the right call to take it immediately, at least in terms of Joshua's career and some other bit. He would have been effectively saying that he didn't believe he could beat Andy Ruiz Jr. immediately. So I think psychologically, if he'd taken all the time off and come back and whatever, and plus there's no guarantees he would have been able to, I'm sure there would have been some time limit in the contracts and other bits and pieces. Who knows where the belts could have been scattered by then if Ruiz Jr. had been fighting a belt drop through no mandatory being fought or whatever. There could have been all sorts of circumstances where 16 months off would not have worked. So Croesus says, if Hunter wins, I can see him as a true American champ on the rise. I think this win, if he gets it over Povetkin, solidifies him as a heavyweight contender of note. I'm not going to go as far as to say that he wins a belt or he can dominate, because I do think that some of the style matchups have favoured Hunter. He's looked good in some of the fights and there's been some really good things that he's done, but some of the big clunky guys that he's fought have made him look maybe better than his... I don't want to overrate him at this point, and I know some people are still saying he's underrated, but I think he's rated about where he should be rated. So Tony says, British judge 118 to 112 to AJ, American judge 115-13 to Ruiz, Canadian 114 apiece. Oh, let's hope not. AJ looks too skinny. Ruiz gamed him with the weight loss, going to be a few pounds heavier than last time. Well, we'll soon see. Weigh-in 3 hours away. So Tunde says AJ will not hold, rather he will keep moving all night. I think there will need to be some form of holding, because I'm not sure Joshua can move all night. Like his back foot game, although it would have to be on the improve after everything he's been doing, he's not necessarily noted for it. And there's been instances in fights before he hasn't looked great going backwards. So I just can't see him doing some sort of, Huey Fury on his bike all night. There's going to be moments where he's going to have to hold and he's going to have to, set his feet and work with Ruiz. But I don't necessarily think it's going to be all moving, but there will have to be more movement than the first fight. And second part of the comment, Ruiz expending more energy and diminishing returns will set in sooner or later. AJ will jab and wait for the right hand opening and timing. Yeah, I think there will be elements of that, and if it goes deep, we'll have to see where Ruiz's cardio is at. Certainly in other fights, like the Parker one, those final rounds, he was gassing out a bit. And that probably allowed Parker to really come in and sort of clinch that win over Ruiz back in 2016. But if he's coming, because remember, Ruiz was 255 for that fight. But if this goes 12 and Ruiz ends up weighing somewhere around 270, you'd have to imagine that the cardio would be a question heading deeper into the fight. But if Ruiz is predicting he's going to win, faster than the first fight, so inside 7, it's probably, beneficial for him to really try to make that happen, because if it does go the distance, there could be diminishing returns, at least in terms of his work rate. And if Joshua can effectively, because Andy Ruiz Jr. is not going to be effective from the outside, let's make that clear. If Joshua can keep him at the end of a jab for different stretches in this fight, throwing right hands, and we've seen the template from Parker. Ruiz Jr. can be nullified to some extent, but Ruiz is really banking on being able to get up close and let those, punches fly. Those combinations, those fast hands, let them go to work. So Arjun says, with Lennox, those punches from Ruckman and McCall were genuine lucky punches. Andy gave AJ a bloody spanking. One lucky shot, as they say, punch from the gods, but 4 knockdowns. I don't necessarily subscribe to lucky punches. Ruckman and McCall were in the fight to try win the fight. They, if Lewis got caught and he got knocked out, I don't necessarily think they're lucky punches. Obviously, the less fancied opponents won, but it's a fight. These things happen. But yeah, I don't necessarily agree with the whole punch from the gods thing from Joshua, because as you point out, 4 knockdowns. They weren't all lucky knockdowns. Adam says Hunter beat Bacoli, a 92-year-old Ustinov, and a good fringe 20 win with Kuzmin. Povetkin to me is still top 10. Well, it's one of these things, I think, with the heavyweight division, you're kind of top 10 till you're not. I think there is an element of fan bias to keep people there while they've still kept winning, even though we could see them. And I think, I've said this for Luis Ortiz and for Alexander Povetkin. They've clearly been on the slide, and they were going to, potentially, I said in one of my Patreon predictions this year, one or both of Povetkin and Ortiz were going to lose this year, and probably one or both would retire. Luis Ortiz, he did lose, but he looks like he may not retire. Povetkin, if he loses this, I could see him retiring. He said as much as well, but with the money available, I think this is why Ortiz wants to keep going, secure his family. We'll see what happens with Povetkin if he loses. But is he still top 10? It's an interesting question, because I have him in my top 10, but as a sort of state, he's there because he hasn't lost. And that was the same for Ortiz. Just because Ortiz has lost now, does that mean he's not top 10, or is he? You can sort of argue all sorts of, sort of theories on this one. So Joshua's only had 2 fights in 15 months. This will be his 3rd. Yeah, the inactivity ahead of the first fight wasn't great. I guess with all the sort of work that he's been doing and the hard sparring, and this is 5 months later, maybe that won't be so much of a factor. I don't know. All these things will end up being hindsight 2020 vision on the loss or the win or whatever ends up happening. So Adam says, I don't think Hunter personally has enough power, but we can all share opinions. It will be interesting. Can Michael Hunter, because he did drop Sergey Kuzmin, who's a pretty durable character, and that was a pretty heavy knockdown in their fight, dominated Kuzmin. If he can put on a similar but Kuzmin and Povetkin, they are different fighters. Kuzmin was pretty flat-footed and there to be hit, and Hunter certainly hit him. So Coach Qatar says, smash the like button, guys. Yes, please. Sam says, I genuinely believe AJ wins this time. He's not showing his cards. We're up for a big surprise. Well, for his sake and for his supporters, I'm sure that is the plan. So Easy Peel says, hi, Boxing Squared. Hello to you too. L-Dog, he's catching Povetkin at the perfect time, but will have to be enough for Hunter to get the win over the line. I will give Hunter full credit as a heavyweight if he beats Povetkin. Yeah, I think this is right fight at the right time, because if it was Povetkin versus Hunter 5 years ago, no question I'd be picking Povetkin. Unger says, Hunter on points, Povetkin has lost too much speed. That's sort of what I'm picking in terms of my result. Hunter on points. So Tony says, Joshua looks like a wounded lion, which is very dangerous. I think he'll box Ruiz from the outside, tear Ruiz part by part, and frustrate Ruiz, finally knock Ruiz out in the 8th to 11th round. Well, I'm sure that's roughly the game plan too, is break him down. Try to not take too many unnecessary risks. Try to keep him on the outside. Easier said than done, though. So Creases says, I can see Hunter stopping Povetkin late, or Povetkin stopping Hunter in the first half. I could see that too. So Jim says, Joshua sold out his British fans for a bigger pay packet. And one of the things with the increase in pay-per-view, I think some of it has probably been to offset the lower live gate, because it's 16,000 seat stadium. Got to make some money back here. And obviously Sky, in terms of a big fight for them, one of the biggest in recent memory, I can see why they'd want to put the price up, because they get more of the money from it. I think it's just simple business. I don't necessarily think it's to do with Dillian Whyte going on the card, because there's always a set amount that they're working with in terms of the purses. And Joshua would have had say over how much was available for those undercard fights. And if Dillian Whyte wanted to be on this card or the other one that was going to be in, what was it, Phoenix, he basically had two choices, one or the other. This probably paid more than the other one, let's face it. So Adam says Hrgovic will have another slow 2020, might get towards an eliminator by the end of 2020. Yeah, I still think, roughly 10 fights on the resume. If he can starch Eric Molina here, get a statement win to a bigger stage, that's going to be good for his profile, especially on an event this big. Everyone who's on this card and looking to go places is going to want to look good and deliver a performance of note, because that really could help their 2020. But in terms of Hrgovic, certainly needs more of the Eric Molina and above type fights now, because he needs to be working through those levels. Sam says PBC is an in-house industry. Matchroom at least makes fights. Well, it's a bit of both for, all these silos that are existing at the moment. Maya says, I don't think AJ has the boxing skills or style to beat Andy Ruiz Jr. Andy has proved he can handle AJ's punch power. Well, he was dropped, so we can't discount that there could be that again, and if it happens late and Ruiz is gassing, it's going to be easier in that sort of instance for Ruiz to be hurt. But he's got an iron chin, so it will be tested again, no doubt. And so too with Joshua, because obviously Ruiz is going to want to repeat the same dose. And if he can look for a similar punch from the gods, as it were, I'm sure he'll want to land it and try to. So Unga says, haven't been Hearn's biggest fan, but this card is a throwback to the Don King stacked heavyweight card. Can't complain about it. So Dan Vid says, G'day Boxing Squad, love your work. Do you see Joshua doing a Vlad Klitschko and fighting tall at range and tying up whenever Ruiz gets close to try eke out a close decision? I think there will certainly be a part of that being played in this fight. There will be a much more conservative and watchful Joshua. And if he does hurt Ruiz, or say drop Ruiz, because there's a debate about how hurt Ruiz was, we're not going to see any rash sort of showman type trying to finish the show in style. He is going to take his time, I think, and try to break Ruiz down when he can. And whether he can, well, that's a big question. So Timothy says, this in-house suggestion is bogus because Eddie knows the public don't want that. AJ wants all comers. Creaser says, how did Andy show that he can take Joshua's power, though? Well, he took a pretty, he got dropped and he got up. He was on steady legs. And if you go back and watch some of that when Joshua was charging in, he actually nailed Ruiz with a couple of really, really big shots in that third round, in that tear-up, before Joshua was caught. And, yeah, to me, and even Andy Ruiz Jr. has said, he knew when he took those shots that he was going to go on and do something in this fight. Obviously, he got the win, so he would say that, but he took some flush shots, some shots that would have knocked other fighters out, and kept coming. So Jason says, Hearn is talking about the next fight being in China, so all the loyal UK fans are being effed up the arse. Next fight in China. I guess, is that dependent on a win or a loss? Because if Joshua loses, they've got the scope to do all sorts of stuff. He's still going to be a popular fighter, given what he's done already in his career, and it would, in a loss, it probably makes sense to take him on the road and do some of these things that they've been talking about forever and a day. But if he has the belts, would it be a title fight in China? Yeah, I don't know. So Creaser says, I'm for discussion. Tell me what made you think Joshua can't knock out Ruiz? Are you talking to me, or was this to someone else? I think Joshua can knock out Ruiz if he can really break him down and, start to... it could start to take a toll in that second half of the fight, especially if Ruiz comes in heavy and he starts to gas later in the fight, and Joshua is still in the fight and in a shape to start, really peppering Ruiz. He could knock him out. So L-Dog says, this is the Big Boys Boxing and Boxing Squared card. I'm also excited that Dillian Whyte is back, says Sam. I'm not as excited just because it kind of, it feels like it's almost a tick over. I mean, I don't want to disrespect Marius Watt, but he's not going to win this fight, and he doesn't really have a chance. Dillian Whyte will get some rounds and activity from this, but I can't say I'm, excited about that fight in particular, but in terms of him coming back, he needs the activity, and obviously this whole situation with UCAD, we'll see where that all goes. Where are we here? Ash says he's betted on Ruiz to win. Maya says AJ doesn't box with a lot of movement, which plays into Ruiz's hands, who likes to move forward and direct to his opponent. Timothy says, Boxing Squared, AJ needs to dominate the first 4 rounds because then Ruiz will need to take more risk. Ruiz looks faster, hands and sharpness. I don't necessarily think Ruiz looks faster. I think Ruiz has always been fast. I don't think it's a case of him being faster. It's still the same, tools and attributes that makes him a tough fighter to face. And he's got decent pop, but I think there's been some of the talk in recent months that's made him out to be, some sort of knockout artist. But when you look at the record, he's got a decent number of knockouts, but he has been taking the distance before. I mean, guys like Kevin Johnson took him the distance, but he did hurt Johnson in that fight. But Johnson was able to keep coming, or not keep coming. He just sort of shells up these days. But at that point, what was that, about 2 years ago? So I mean, if Joshua is smart, he can take this fight deeper into it. I think that probably favors him as well. Adam says he carries the WBC International. Huck is a Euro level fight with the WBC ranking of 23. So this must be in relation to Joe Joyce. He is fighting, by the looks of it, in January. So Scott has asked Ace to keep his comments to less than 10 per minute. Carissa says, nothing went on with AJ. I'm an AJ fan, but he's nothing more to it. Tomorrow I hope he shows what I see in him and gets the belt back. Well, certainly that will be the talk if he manages to handle Andy Ruiz Jr., fight with confidence, break him down, work him to some sort of decision. If he looks dominant in there, it's going to be good for, certainly his profile, and I think to rehabilitate some of his image, which has taken a hit from that, loss on June 1st in New York. Dropped 4 times and beaten up over the course of 7 rounds. Timothy Thomas says, Tom Little earning a payday and no more. Unrivaled Boxing Talk and News says, Rob, what time is the weigh-in? That's 2 a.m. 2 a.m. my time. I think it's 1 p.m. UK time. So Maya says, if AJ fights at distance using his jab, which I haven't seen him do before, then maybe he can win. Well, he needs to use that jab. He needs to use that as a weapon to try, give Ruiz Jr. something to think about when he's trying to come in and make his way into the inside, because that was something that was neglected to some degree in that first fight, even before that first knockdown of Joshua. As I said earlier, so 99 in the chat, I know that a lot of people who were here now weren't here earlier, but in terms of if you go back and watch those first couple of rounds, Ruiz just walking in, and there was no real resistance, and that sort of plays right into his wheelhouse and what he wants to do. So Adam says, looks like us in the UK will have to put up with Smith, Macklin, Froch as the comms. I can imagine. I think that'll probably be the same here for the pay-per-view that comes to New Zealand. Hopefully there's going to be a decent call on this a bit more down the line. I remember, because I think the first time around I had the DAZN feed, and when Ruiz Jr. hurt Joshua, it was like it wasn't acknowledged for about 3 or 4 seconds, and it was only when Joshua was about to, hit the deck that I think Paulie Malignaggi sort of, said Joshua's hurt, And that was when the other commentators sort of, and it sort of seems to be one of these things that you see and you know, and sometimes the house fighter has, you know, a bit more of a generous ride from the commentators. But hopefully now that Ruiz is a champion, if there is a big shot that lands, it's going to be called, because certainly was a few times right in that first fight. I was like, oh, that was a good shot, and just silence. So Heavy D said, did Hearn pay Molina's UCAD bill? Well, he's finished his ban, so he doesn't need to worry about UCAD anymore. But this fight's not in the UK either. He's free to fight anywhere else. So, yeah, Molina's case, if you don't know, he pleaded ignorance. He took a vitamin B12 supplement over the counter, didn't bother checking what was in it, and his defense to UCAD was, I didn't know what was in it. And then they sort of threw the book at him, and then he sort of come out complaining, said, well, if I had have offered a different explanation, and I could have maybe had a leaner sentence and that sort of stuff. But yeah, I kind of think that he's tried to play the public to make out that UCAD's the baddie here, but in the end, he took the substance that had something that was banned in it, be it a vitamin B12 supplement. I think it had dexamethasone. That was the banned substance that was in it. I still think Molina's a bit of an idiot for what happened, and trying to plead ignorance as your defense, never going to work well. Arjun says, unrivaled boxing talk and news, just go to DAZN USA YouTube channel. You'll get the timing for your country when they are showing the weigh-ins. Damien says, I don't know if you already mentioned it, but what are your pay-per-view predictions for the AJ Andy rematch? It's an interesting question. I mean, we never really get the exact number because they're not published in the United States. I mean, there's been all those different figures that come out from the Broadcasters Association, which are effectively used as these were the numbers or the range. I would sort of think it will do at least around the Joseph Parker and Vlad numbers, the 1.5, 1.4, 1.5 number. Maybe that's a baseline. Maybe this will do 1.6, 1.7. I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I know there's a lot of interest. So Crown Admirer says, I watched Ruiz closely the past month. His weakness is his right temple. AJ has enough power to exploit this. A good short right hook to the spot will drop Ruiz cold. Jay Shine says, I'm looking forward to a good fight between AJ and Ruiz. Well, that's all we can hope for now. I mean, it's all over in terms of the preparation, bar the shouting. So let's hope it's the officials, you know, the judging. Let's hope the referee isn't an undue influence in the ring, and that we do get a good fight. And Arjun says he just wants to see a violent fight. Well, if it ends up being a real war and this is a memorable fight, I think there will be a lot of people that will start to hearken this to be reminiscent of, you know, the Thriller in Manila or the Rumble in the Jungle, etc. So Adam says Molina will be taken out an 8 count after the ring announcement. Yeah, I'm not sure how he will go in this fight, just because he's at the tail end of his career, and Hrgović is going to be a problem for heavyweights in the next year or two as he comes up. I know a lot of people aren't necessarily sold on him, but this is an opportunity for him as a rising heavyweight prospect, former Olympic medalist, noted amateur, and a guy that's got a couple of good level wins on his resume, you know, in terms of who he's fought at the point at which he fought them, good prospect level wins. This is the venue, you know, the opportunity to make a statement. So if he can get a lickety-split type knockout, which is a brutal knockout, and remember Anthony Joshua fought Eric Molina a few years ago, knocked him out in a couple of rounds without, I don't even think Molina threw a punch in that fight. I think Molina will have a bit more ambition in this fight. Well, that's according to what he's sort of, you know, he's talking pretty big about what he's going to do, and Hrgović hasn't felt his power. But if Hrgović takes him out in a couple of rounds, that helps his cause massively. Jay Shine says Dillian looks real overweight and out of shape. Yeah, he's looking a bit heavy. Timothy says Dillian will weigh 255. If it was 255, I'd be surprised by that. Adam says Dillian's shape is round. Wow, I must be about 30 minutes behind on the comments, so apologies. I'm slowly catching up here, or falling behind. whatever the case may be. So 97 in the chat. Hello and welcome to one and all. Thank you for joining the live stream. I do appreciate it wherever you are, morning, noon or night. Hope you're having a good one. Jason says, if Dillian puts in a bad performance, Wilder will offer him the fight. I don't see that happening, but there is scope for White. I mean, I'm not saying about the fight not being a bad performance, but I don't think Wilder is going to offer him the fight. He's got the Fury fight lined up, and if he lost that, the Fury fight, there'll be a trilogy fight, and if he wins that, then you might end up seeing either a unification potentially at the back end of 2020, or more likely Adam Kovnatsky will eventually get his shot. I don't know. There's a few permutations depending on who wins the belts and what happens with mandatories. But of Dillian Whyte, there is scope for him to go and have a bad performance. I mean, have we forgotten about the Robert Helenius fight? Dreadful viewing. And that, there is some potential for Marius Wach, who is durable, yet potentially a bit negative, for this to end up looking a bit like that Helenius fight. And that would not help Whyte's stock at all. And L-Dog says, Dillian Whyte's B sample is now buried in the deserts of Saudi Arabia. Theolemus Lofi says, Dillian Whyte saying he will clear his name while not calling for B sample to be opened. D. Hodges says, Wilder wants Whyte. He said it because he cheated his family when he got caught cheating. Heavy D says, Wilder wants walkovers. Be honest with yourself. Sam says, it's fun how Molina said Wilder hits harder than AJ when AJ got him out of there in 3 rounds, and it took Wilder 9 rounds to KO. So Eli Grand says, whereabouts in New Zealand are you from? I'm from the Wellington area. ADB says, AJ hoping Andy takes it easy on him. Well, he might be hoping that, but he shouldn't be expecting that. Jay Shine says, I want to see how Whyte looks. I think he's going to have a real poor performance. Could happen. Super chat from Scott70. Thank you very much for that. He says, bet this on your prediction, mate. Oh, for which fight though? There's certainly money to be made in a couple of different fights. I would have to check the odds. I don't normally really sort of gamble because there's a lot of bets that I know I could make, with my head, but then I get tempted by the value and I'll end up going for maybe slightly longer odd type fights because I'm looking at the return. Yeah, I'm certainly not a boxing bettor like MBT Boxing, who's a master at some of these things. So Shane says, I still want to know why you're called Boxing Squared. Well, when I started the channel, I just came up with the name, and I have thought about what was around in terms of names. I didn't want to name similar to others, and boxing ring called the Squared Circle, but also part of having boxing as the first part of my channel name was it comes earlier in people's notifications in terms of their channel list. So when you go down and you see channels, B is the second letter. So if you see that I've got a new video, you might click on it before you click on to others potentially, which might increase the chances of you watching it. I don't know. That's just the way that I thought about it. Whether that actually happens, I don't know. But yeah, the Squared Circle, so Boxing Squared. Hopefully you're satisfied with that explanation. It wasn't like I put days of thought into it or anything like that. But yeah. So Theomilus Lofi says, sorry for butchering your name there too. Maybe because Wilder caught him in the 9th round, the rounds don't determine the hard puncher. So Adam Fahey says Shane Jordan follows Boxing Squared from every angle. So AA Boxing and Blunt says, RD says 80% of people in Saudi had Ruiz winning. Yeah, I mean, maybe some of the media members and other people that are sort of there in or around what's happening at the moment are seeing something we're not here to give them confidence in their predictions. But of the predictions, and I mentioned this earlier, of different boxers that are picking one or the other, there's no real sort of leaning one way or the other. It's sort of split quite evenly. So Heavy D says this card is missing one thing, Dave Allen. If if Dave Allen was on this card, yeah, nah. I mean, I think I would, just because how things are played out and all he's been talking it up that he wants to come back, and now he's right, but he sort of, flip-flops on where he really is with his mental health, and he's even admitted he lies about different stuff. So, I mean, I don't know what to make of Dave Allen at the moment, but if he has a bigger rest and can get things right, I don't know. It's up to him what he does with his career, but I think there's a number of people, including myself, who are somewhat concerned about Dave Allen and some of, if it means that, he can keep some of his sanity. Excuse me. I must have swallowed a piece of dust or something. Maybe it was that moth that was attacking me earlier. The card is missing one thing, Dave Allen. Yeah, I'd rather not see him on there. I'll probably leave it at that. I'd rather see himself take time, get well. So Rory says, have you had any interest in anyone sponsoring your channel? Oh, occasionally I get approaches, but I don't know how real some of them really are. I mean, it's like cap type ads, which is either at the start or the end, but it's not like we'll give you this. It's if people go from your channel to our site, then you can get money, which to me kind of seems like I'd be maybe on the wrong side of that one. I don't know. But yeah, just because, I mean, the channel's still growing. I mean, the sort of intent is to keep growing it. And yeah, I mean, I really haven't thought about sponsorship or trying to get sponsors. And I'm not actively looking for sponsors. But yeah, I mean, if it happened, it happened. But yeah, I think I would rather still grow the channel to a much bigger size. And hopefully it continues to grow. But I'll move on to the boxing talk proper. So Shane says, oh, sorry. Okay, we've got a lot of people just talking about other stuff here, just catching up. So Suko says, 100 people listening and just 9 likes. Smash the like button. Didn't someone say there was about 30 likes before? So hopefully there'll be more than 9. But yes, if you're in the chat, enjoying the content, please, or the live stream, please do smash that like button. It would be much appreciated. Actually, I'll get on to the other fight before I keep going down here. So another fight this weekend, pretty much or card this weekend, pretty much the only one of note with heavyweights on it is Arslanbek Makhmudov and Samuel Peter, and also Simon Keane versus Sergey Lyakovich. For me, Makhmudov is going to batter Samuel Peter. Maybe we'll see Peter with another sort of strange looking retirement type fight. I don't know. It was, that fight with Hughie Fury in Saudi Arabia back, what was it, mid-year? Something about that didn't sit well with me. I thought he was, I don't want to say faking injury, but it certainly appeared something that he was claiming he was injured. I didn't quite think he really was as hurt as he was. He was just starting to gas, and I think he just didn't fancy it anymore. And it wasn't like he was getting battered by Hughie Fury, but I think Arslanbek Makhmudov is going to make mincemeat of Samuel Peter and Simon Keane. And remember, Samuel Peter's over 40, and the listed age was at 40 or 41. It's a bit debatable as well. He's probably older. Lyakovich, he's facing Keane. Lyakovich is 43, 44 now. Remember, he was the guy that was left writhing on the canvas from Deontay Wilder about 6 or 7 years ago. Keane is probably going to put it on Lyakovich as well. Not great matchmaking, not competitive fights. These two rising prospects. Makhmudov a lot more sort of oomph behind his career at the moment, as opposed to Keane, who didn't have an upset loss about a year ago, but did sort of revenge that loss earlier this year. I just think the matchmaking's not great. I'm going to be watching it because I've got a subscription to punchinggrace.com. That's where the fight is being screened. I think it's 3 months for about $40 or something like that. I think my subscription runs out next month, so this will be the last fight that I can watch on that before that runs out. I would just hope Makhmudov shows us a few things that he's been working on in the gym. Very right hand dominated in terms of right uppercuts, overhand rights, etc., straight rights. Not a lot of work with the left hand, not a lot of jabs, not a lot of left hooks, but we saw a little bit of variation in his last fight against Johnny-Ruiz, and that was good for him, that fight, because he was taking, 7 or 8 rounds, the most in his career. He needs some guys that can take him some rounds. Peter might be able to take him some rounds and absorb some punishment, but I mean, I think I would prefer to see him in with some, better opposition, and maybe some more type opposition like Johnny-Ruiz, who can give him a bit of movement, something to think about, that he has to work a bit harder than sort of just standing and just, unloading the right arm. Keane, yeah, he's going to beat Liakovic as well. So Angus says Boxing Squid, Ruiz take TKO in the 9th or split decision for Ruiz. And Liam thinks that he'll get the stoppage against Joshua. Just a second. Must have swallowed some dust or something. Creaser says Majidov, Hrgovic in the first 6, White between 5 and 8, Hunter in the championship rounds, and the main event is an absolute question mark. Just hoping Joshua wins. Yeah, for me it's a question mark too. The other fights I'm confident in my picks, but the main event, I mean, and this is kind of exciting that it is so hard to call what it might actually, the result might be, because if Joshua makes the adjustments, or some adjustments, I mean, I think some of the talk that he has to do this, that and the other, I mean, I think some of the adjustments might be a bit more subtle than that, but he's got to use his jab. If Ruiz is trying to pressure him and come in, he's got to make him pay to try, if he tries to work his way to the inside. But if Ruiz is able to get what he wants and able to counter Joshua, able to get to the inside, work the body head, I mean, it could be an early night for Joshua, under sort of 7 rounds as Ruiz is predicting. And Adam says he's got money on both results. Unga says Brubaker is a tough bugger. Okay, is this card in Australia? Theolemus Lofi says we're talking about power, not skills. Antonio says it was Joshua going full retard trying to finish the fight early. Well, I think we will see a bit more of a conservative Joshua in that sense, that if he does feel that he's starting to put the hurt on Ruiz, that I don't think he'll try to go in for the kill. I think he'll be more measured, and he'll really try to ensure that he's peppering and battering Ruiz over a number of rounds to soften him up for some sort of knockout later in the fight. I don't think it'll end with one punch. I mean, we've seen that Ruiz is durable. He's taken Joshua's best punches in that first fight and kept coming. So yeah, if it is going to be a knockout, it's going to be hard-earned by Joshua setting it up over several rounds. Body Snatcher says AJ has to follow what McCracken says. He's the only person in the world who cares about AJ. Eddie and groupies just care about money. AJ brings them. McCracken opposed Ruiz fight, but Eddie forced his choice. Well, one of the things is McCracken, he's openly stated that Joshua's just got to stick to the game plan. And effectively all the things that we've been talking about that we think he might be doing, moving a bit more, working the jab, being, more disciplined in the execution of his game plan. That's what McCracken's talking about. But performing and executing in the ring, it's a different story, because, Ruiz is a tough customer. He's going to be coming and giving things Joshua to think about. Just because you have a game plan and a fight strategy doesn't mean you can implement it. So Carl says Joshua is getting smoked, and that could be an outcome. George Michael says, did you say Ruiz-Joshua starts at 8:45, or is that the card start time? Ring walk is 8:45, so that presumably would be in about 10 minutes later that the fight gets underway, or 15 minutes. That's in the UK, so my time, it's 9:45. Theomelis Lofi, 6 a.m, what time zone? That will be the start of the card in New Zealand. But in terms of the UK, that's starting at, I'm not sure what time to start. You'd have to check, but ring walk is definitely, from what I've seen being posted at numerous places, and from Eddie Hearn, is 8:45 p.m. in the UK. I think it's mid-afternoon in the US Central Time, something like 2 or 3 p.m. And in New Zealand, it's going to be 9:45 a.m. Australia, minus a couple of hours from that, depending on where you are, and if it's Western Australia, about 4 hours. And if anywhere else in the world that I haven't covered, I mean, you'll be able to work out just by the world clock. L-Dog says, people are really blowing things out of proportion. AJ is not a bum, and Ruiz is not the greatest heavyweight of all time. It's a 50-50 fight between two good heavyweights. Yeah, I mean, that's how I look at it. I mean, all of a sudden, Joshua just didn't become, a bum or nothing. Because, I mean, I think one of the things people forget is that actually takes away the credit that you can give Andy Ruiz for winning the first time. And people were giving Ruiz credit to no end, so that must mean that Joshua was a good heavyweight at the time he beat Joshua, because otherwise why would you give him so much credit? I think people don't understand that they're actually hurting arguments for the when they support their own fighter and say Joshua's nothing, he's going to get blown out, Shouldn't you be saying, if you support Ruiz and you think it's he's going to win, you should be talking Joshua up to some extent, because he is a good heavyweight? I think people sort of, sabotage their own arguments and not even realise it. So Arjun says, it's 2:15 Sunday morning, Saturday night in India. Going to be a great night of boxing. Haven't been drinking for a while. Going to smash a crate of beer this Saturday. Well, hopefully you don't actually end up passed out before the main event, because 2:15 in the morning, and if you're going to be smashing a crate, you're probably starting earlier on Saturday night. You're going to have to take it easy, I'd imagine, to some extent. So Carl says Ruiz won't gas out. Does Ruiz gas out? Ruiz won't gas out, says Arjun. I mean, it depends how the fight goes. I mean, if this ends up being a more conservative fight from Joshua, the pace may actually suit Ruiz, because if it's not a high volume fight, then that's going to help Ruiz's cause. But if Joshua makes some work, which we don't necessarily know that he will, maybe he will end up gassing later in the fight. There's also, I mean, if you go back and watch that fight, as I said earlier, with Joseph Parker, I mean, that wasn't necessarily a high volume fight, and Ruiz was definitely gassing later in that fight. So Raz says, I still feel that Ruiz has AJ's number. Shane says Ruiz has a good tank. He does have a good tank. A lot of fighters have a good tank, but that doesn't mean you don't gas. I mean, Deontay Wilder's noted for being in shape all year round. He was definitely invisibly gassing in that fight, the first Fury fight, in those later rounds. He was, but that was the effort of the punches. He was finding fresh air. But, a guy like Wilder had never really sort of had questions about his gas tank. And I don't necessarily think he does now, but you can't dispute that he was looking a bit tired towards the end of that fight. And that could happen with Ruiz as well. And if he does tire to some extent, that could provide some openings for Joshua. But like I say, though, if Joshua's still there and he's been working hard, who's to say where his gas tank is at that point in the fight? There's so many different sort of ifs, buts, and maybes with what could happen here, which, given we can't definitively say either way how it could pan out, and I know some people are, just saying one's going to bang the other out, etc. But for me, there's just so much to this fight that's intriguing, and this is why I think it's so big. I wonder how Joshua got his peds through customs. Oh, come on. Creaser says the way he put Ruiz down. Ruiz is going to beat this boy, says Shane. Krasin says the winner will lose to Pulev, so really no matter who wins that fight. I know I've had a lot of Bulgarians coming to my channel bigging up Kubrat Pulev, but honestly I think both Joshua and Ruiz do beat Kubrat Pulev. Creaser says, Shane says AJ can't hurt Ruiz now, he's lost his power. How's he lost his power? Being a little bit slimmer. Not necessarily, I don't necessarily think that's true. I mean, we've seen Joshua at earlier weights in his career where he was just under 240, and the power didn't seem to be a problem then. Creaser says, was the thing he should have been doing all night long and not going to exchange with him. D. Hodges says, Wilder KO'd 37 out of 42 people into retirement. Where Brazil been? Interesting question. What is Brazil doing? Obviously there was some chat about a potential fight with Charles Martin or Gerald Washington. There's been some talk about maybe Oscar Rivas. I don't know. I mean, Brazil obviously, after having a soul taken by Deontay Wilder earlier this year, has been almost a ghost on social media. A few more posts more recently, but we'll see. Carl says Joshua is a poor man's Frank Bruno. I think it's a pretty ruthless assessment. I mean, Joshua's had a pretty storied career compared to Frank Bruno in terms of what he's done. But also, I mean, Frank Bruno, I mean, I think a good sort of analysis on that, Del Boy's Boxing News, actually, I don't think it's called that anymore. No, it's Blue Collar Sports TV now, with Del Boy. He was talking about that in one of his videos where he talked about the comparison being a little bit vicious, and I do tend to agree with him on that. So L-Dog says, Joshua might punch harder. He has KO'd better opposition. Kwahi says, AJ catches Ruiz coming in at round 8. Could be a bit of that in this fight. I mean, Ruiz is going to back his chin in this, and he's going to have to, you know, if Josh was working the jab and trying to keep him on the outside, Ruiz is going to have to find a way to the inside, and there will be times where he will be there for a punch. I mean, uppercut could be a good punch for Joshua in this fight, but he's got to be working the jab first and foremost, at least in my eyes. It has to be something that can't sort of be there for the first couple of rounds and drop off. And that seems to be a problem in a lot of fights, that a lot of guys start strong with the jab, and you just see them sort of put it into their pocket after about round 3, and you wonder what happened. Why didn't they keep throwing it? So Shane says, AJ afraid to do the pads, but Ruiz wasn't. From the open workout. I don't really think you can take too much from open workout. Sometimes there's a lot that's sort of not shown. They just want to do basic warm-ups, workouts. It's more an event to promote the event, give something back to the public, and they look like they had a pretty decent crowd there for that one. So Unga says, if you haven't caught it, check out Stephen Shaw, first round knockout of Corbin today. The big shot has fireworks in that right hand. Yeah, Stephen Shaw is a guy to keep an eye on if you haven't been following him. He's promoted by Lou DiBella. There's a number of these Lou DiBella heavyweights who are sort of just going under the radar that probably need to get on to some bigger cards. I'd like to see Stephen Shaw get a bit more TV time. Creaser says, not my name, but got the point. Sorry, my bad. Okay, I'm not sure what that's about. So Adam says he wants to see Junior Fa, another DiBella fighter, versus Stephen Shaw. That would actually be, I think, a good test for both. Whether DiBella wants to burn one or the other off at this point in their careers, probably not. I'm not sure that Junior Fa would agree, his team would agree to that fight. No money in it either, probably, at this point. AA Boxing and Blunt says, as a small heavyweight, Ruiz will have worked at fighting out of the clinch for years. You need to have that in your armour as a small, fat guy. Yeah, I mean, a lot of what Anthony Joshua's going to look to try to do probably is not going to be that unfamiliar to Andy Ruiz Jr. He would have had a lot of taller guys, you know, because he is a smaller heavyweight in terms of height, you know, trying to implement similar type tactics. I mean, we saw Joseph Parker, who was, what, 6? He's 6'3", 6'4". Ruiz listed at 6'2", but more like 6'1", maybe closer to 6. The whole working from the outside, he was at times able to nullify Ruiz. But, you know, when Joseph Parker tried to work on closer, you know, from mid-range to the inside, Ruiz definitely had a lot of success in that fight. So Adam says, Hope Light Sparks, that's David Light. Trent Broadhurst have an appointment in 20 minutes. Okay, so we're 2 hours and 12 minutes into the stream. Wow, that went fast. So we've got 92 in the chat here. What I might try to do is wrap this up in about 10 minutes because it'll be almost midnight. I've got a couple of videos that I want to work on before this weigh-in at 2 o'clock my time in a couple of hours. So that's when the weigh-in is, a couple of hours away now. I might just try to... I'm just flicking through the questions here. Do I only cover heavyweight? Yes I do. Do dinosaurs still roam in New Zealand? Well, we have tuataras, so yes, that is actually a dinosaur. But then again, you know, crocodiles, which are not in New Zealand, they're a dinosaur as well, of some sort. So someone says hobbits are endemic. very popular tourist attraction. The Lord of the Rings still draws, a lot of tourism to New Zealand. L-Dog says, smash the like button. Yes, please. So, liberalism is a cult says, only 74 likes. We can't show more love. Yes, please smash that like button, says Will Magic Man. Tony Augustine, left hook, like that button. Well, left hook, I think that will be a good punch for Andy Ruiz Jr. again, not necessarily just to the head, but I think the body, I don't think Ruiz can afford to neglect that body. So Unga says Shaw was sparring Ruiz. I didn't actually know that, but it's interesting. A number of guys, they've both had good sparring in their training camps. Joshua, a lot of sparring, more time in the gym, a lot of hard sparring. We'd heard through David Hay with Carlos Takam having said he came in to a camp before with Joshua and expecting to sort of have a bit of a rumble, and it was technical sparring. Clearly some of the tactics and the thinking about what they're doing in training camp has changed. They've reflected, they've made changes, adjustments ahead of this fight, but it could all be for naught. We'll have to see what happens. This is why I love this fight so much. It's I can't predict who's going to win this one because it's so close to call. I could see it playing out a million different ways. So Landlord #UK says, I'm an AJ fan, but he doesn't have that fire in him still. Don't have that confidence by the looks of his video. Say DJ DQ says, big up Mr. Boxing Squared. AJ is going to pound the fat man. Big up to you too. Jason says, I think Wilder vs Fury will be called off. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of talk about, I've seen fans speculating about that. But even if it is called off, I mean, Kubrat Pulev is due his IBF title shot by the end of May. I mean, the IBF might decide, because it's unlikely, say, if Ruiz wins and he fought Wilder for unification, would it be in February? And if it was, that's only 2 months before Pulev would have to have a shot. There may not be an IBF belt for an undisputed. I know a lot of people are saying, there could be an undisputed, but I think there's too many other factors, and the whole sort of, I get thrown at me, unification trumps mandatories, but the IBF has already ruled on Pulev's status of getting his title shot. It's already in stone that he has to have it before the end of May, and they don't muck around. So, I don't know. I mean, if there was Wilder versus Ruiz next, if Ruiz won, I mean, that's, all the better for it to happen, but it may not be for all the belts. But if it did happen and it was for all the belts, and then later one was stripped because of Pulev or Usyk or whatever, I mean, hey, we might get a chance for undisputed. I don't know, but from what we're hearing, from what has been said, the contracts have been signed for the second fight. So, I mean, how much leeway is there for Wilder and his team to pull out of that fight? I don't know. So Boxing Fan says Ruiz wins the rematch based on styles. 100% sure he wins. I put money on it. Well, good luck to you. Liam says Sam Holtman, that's if Wilder beats Fury. If Fury wins, we'll see a trilogy before anything else. Yeah, I mean, if Fury beat Wilder in the second fight, there would definitely be a trilogy fight at some point next year. Will Magic Man, AJ versus Ruiz reminds me of Peter Griffin versus the Big Chicken in Family Guy. Well, they had some pretty epic fights, and if it ends up being a barn burner like those ones, all the better. So Alex Yo says, just watched the first Joshua vs Ruiz fight, and after getting spooked watching Ruiz in the public workout, I've switched back to favouring AJ. He just needs to keep it long, like Lewis vs Tua. Theolemus Lofi says, we need a superhuman division to accommodate Jarrell Miller, Dillian White, and Povetkin. Oh, ruthless. I've never come across any group of fans like boxing fans are. It was baffling at first, but used to it now. Yeah, I think the boxing fandom, it moves in mysterious ways sometimes, that's for sure. Will Magic Man says, World Heavyweight Boxing, lol. I think someone had deleted a comment there, so I'm not sure what that was in reference to. Will Magic Man, the Big Chicken, was robbed. So that's versus Peter Griffin. Excuse me. Okay, I'm gonna scroll down to the bottom here. I'm just not sure where I was in the chat. Lost my place. I'll scroll a little bit up here just to get through some of these comments here. What happened to Manuel Char? Good question. Hasn't fought since 2017. He claims that others don't want to fight him, but for me, part of it, he's looking for a payout, for a payday, and a cash out against one of the big guys. He rates himself as a legend in his own lunchbox, but Manuel Char is going to get smoked by most, if not all, of the top 20. So Leonard says Stephen Shaw is the best US heavyweight prospect where not much US fan know about. DiBella is a SH ... promoter. They definitely need to get him onto some bigger cards, that's for sure. He is a good heavyweight. I mean, sometimes he's fired and other times that he hasn't, but there's a lot of talent there. So Isaac says, I can't be the only one thinking that AJ will comfortably win the rematch. He has more tools in the tool shed. So Michael says, poor clinching technique can lead to a KO by uppercut. Well, let's hope Joshua's been working on that in camp, because if he is going to tie up, he's going to have to tie up well. So Leonard says, Char still trying to make a fight with Trevor Bryan. I mean, who knows? I mean, Trevor Bryan himself has been inactive for basically 18 months. 54 Trell Swan says, is boxing popular in New Zealand? Yes and no. And I sort of say that because if it's anything apart from Joseph Parker, well then no. I mean, no one really knows. I mean, even my friends that sort of follow sport more broadly really don't know anything about boxing. Or they'll say something to me about boxing and I'll have to sort of, fill them in on what the real story is, because, they're the definition of casual fans. So they might dip in for big fights, that sort of stuff. But the yes part is if Joseph Parker is involved, especially when he was fighting in New Zealand on the way up, they really promoted him well, built him up to be a household name. And obviously he ended up getting a title shot that was held in New Zealand, and that solidified him as a household sporting star. I mean, he would be one of the most popular sort of sporting stars, or well-known sporting stars in New Zealand. And for a sport which is really quite fringe in New Zealand, that really they did a good job to build him up. But outside of that, I mean, a lot of people that I know, even that are sports fans, don't know that the rematch is happening this weekend between Joshua and Ruiz. Or they might have heard something about it and they don't know if it's this weekend or if it's still coming up. So yeah, definitely UFC is starting to become quite popular in New Zealand. I mean, there's Israel Adesanya, who's out of Auckland. He's at the same gym Junior Farr trains at, City Kickboxing in Auckland. And there's Dan the Hangman Hooker and a few other UFC fighters that are starting to make a few waves. So it's one of these, I would say probably UFC is more popular than boxing in New Zealand. That's just I don't have any official numbers to back that up, but I know a lot more people who watch the UFC than they do boxing. So Adam Fahey says Char has to fight Bryan. Well, that's the dream, isn't it? That one of those guys fights and we never see the other after it. I think Bryan beats Char. Char versus Rivas. If they could get enough money on the table, Char might take that fight. I think Rivas smokes him. Adam Fahey says Rivas KO in that one. Agreed. Bryan is waiting for Don King to die so he can make the Char fight. Yeah, I don't know what happened. They were talking about that for November the 2nd, and it just never happened. They were trying to line it up with the 45th anniversary of Rumble in the Jungle, but I don't know. It seemed to be happening. They had promo posters. Char even put it up on his social media in September or whatever it was, and then all of a sudden it just went quiet. And 54 Trell Swan says Char hasn't fought in 2 years. Is that regular title cursed? I think some of it is just more down to, some guys who pick up these titles. They've given opportunities to fight for belts in fights that no one called for the belt to be on the line. Because remember, that belt was put on the line at almost the last minute against Alexander Ustinov. No one called for that to be on the line. I don't even know why they had it on the line. I don't know why they put Trevor Bryan and BJ Flores for an interim status. They tried to make up a story that Char and Akendo, I think at the time, there was something about the negotiations that hadn't gone well, so they didn't know if that could go ahead. So they decided to put an interim status on the line, which to me, both Cha and Akendo's people came out and said that's just complete rubbish. What are you talking about? Yet there was an interim status on the line. And then obviously you had Joe Joyce picking up a vacant gold belt, which was considered a heavyweight title. So you had 4 champions until recently. But Joe Joyce has apparently vacated that belt. So Lou Buck says, I got Rivas, so that would be in a Cha fight. Angus says, Leonard Sterling, only if it comes to Joseph Parker, then it's not too big here. Yeah, well, and that's just what I went through. Liam says, Cha should be stripped. Well, he's got to do something soon. Surely the WBA should be putting some pressure on him. Because, I mean, he's already relatively irrelevant in the heavyweight division. Although, I mean, all of these guys that win these titles and then don't fight for ages, you see them on social media fronting like they're the best thing since sliced bread. But, you know, if you haven't been in a fight for a couple of years, I mean, there's something a bit wrong there. And Trevor Bryan, 18 months now. I mean, come on. So Felix Drolly says, Kubrat, pull out Pulev. Well, if he pulls out of whenever his title shot is in 2020, he'll never get another one. Getting down to the end of my water here. Rivas beat Ruiz in the amateurs. Yes, he did. But, I mean, some of that stuff is 10 years ago now. I mean, I made this point about the whole Zhili Zhang. He was talking about, I think he beat Ruiz in the amateurs as well. Excuse me. Frog in my throat. He beat Ruiz in the amateurs, and he also had fights with Anthony Joshua in the amateurs, and that was part of the way that they were positioning him on social media to fans that probably had never heard of him. And I was like, what can you take from, you know, you fought this guy 10 years ago or more in the amateurs? It doesn't mean anything anymore. If it was last year, well, maybe, or a couple of years ago, we might be able to talk about that, but I was just like, come on. USA prospect, Shaw is better than Franklin, Cheney and Rock. It's a little hard to say, just because a lot of these guys, I mean, Cheney was out, last week against Nick Jones, and yeah, but Nick Jones is a guy that F.A. Ajagba, took out in a round or two last year. It's some of these guys are approaching 20 fights, and they haven't really fought anyone, so it's hard to get a gauge on some of their level. Like, Rock seems to have all the talent, but does he have the discipline? And his Cheney, he seems to have committed himself to boxing more, but he's been caught by shots before and dropped. Franklin, on the last couple of fights, hasn't looked spectacular at all. Shaw, a couple of fights I've seen, I've thought, yeah, he looks good. Then other fights have been a little bit more sort of on the fence, but yeah, we'll see. I mean, they've got to start fighting some better opposition before we know. Some of these guys, I mean, it feels, and it's not just them, it's other guys in the heavyweight division building up all these records to, they want to walk from a sort of just passing the prospect stage straight into a title fight without going through this couple of levels to really establish where they're at. So Michael Woodward says, if people want mandatories before undisputed, they are not boxing fans. See, I just think that's silly, because the mandatories, they just haven't happened forever. I want undisputed, but there is realities within boxing, and it's not people wanting mandatories before undisputed, it's the realities of the sport. They may want to say, if Ruiz wins and Fury steps aside, for example, it may not be undisputed because the IBF may just strip them. It might be that simple. So you can't just make blanket statements like that, because I think that doesn't actually represent the situation in an accurate manner. You've got, these boxing organizations, some of them are a bit more ruthless than others. The IBF isn't going to muck around. They've already ruled on that. We could have had undisputed in the last year or two. Both sides of that argument, the fight never got made. So, you can't just blame one or the other. And I don't know. I mean, talking about undisputed, it just feels like some sort of mythical unicorn creature at this point. And some of the narratives about how it will happen, and I've seen all the people on both sides of either the Wilder camp or the Joshua camp talking about the other side is going to lock up the belts and we'll never see them again, and that they'll just be fighting in-house fights. I mean, let's just see where the chips fall and what's actually going to happen, whether it's a reality. But if people want mandatories before undisputed, they are not boxing fans. I mean, that doesn't reflect some of what could actually happen. So Leonard says, I picked Dubois to beat Shaw. Yeah, I would too. Ivana says, Ruiz will win in round 3. That's confidence. Lubak says, I agree, Michael Woodward. So if Undisputed can happen, yeah, I would like to see it happen, but it just may not be a reality. And that's not me saying I don't want it to happen. So don't get it twisted and get all bitter and twisted in the comments, because I'll come back at you. 54 Trell Swan says, why is the WBA regular title passed along through bum fighters? Surely only the top 10 should fight. Well, this is the thing. Some of the rankings end up looking so ridiculous. Some of these guys end up climbing up off the back of limited work into the top 10 of that, sanctioning body. How Trevor Bryan managed to get all the way up, the WBA rankings to be in a fight for an interim title with BJ Flores, a former cruiserweight who'd fought no one at heavyweight. It's beyond me. Unga says, why does the WBA regular title even exist? Money, and that's what Adam Fahey says, for the money. Unga says, no one should ever speak of it. Adam says, Eddie should overpay Char for the regular title for the Hunter and versus Povetkin fight. A winner. Well, Char has spoken about wanting to fight Povetkin again, so if he won, maybe that would happen. So Double A Boxing and Blunt says, the idea was when the WBA belt holder unified, they got elevated, but now they have 3 belts. It's a joke. And it was 4. So Unga says, lineal exists, but Fury has soiled it. Damo says, Ruiz's style is all wrong for AJ. For such a big guy, he doesn't like to be hit. He can't cope with fast hooks coming up. Also, AJ has 0 head movement. And the head movement, he's going to need to have some of that, because if he doesn't, he'll be a target that can be clipped. Ruiz only has to have a few moments of success if the head isn't moving to catch up with him, and it could really change the fight. Ghost Dog, I counted Klitschko as lineal, so in my opinion, Tyson is lineal champion, but not a lineal belt holder. Lubak says Shaw needs to fight a Kaufman or Wallish next. Yeah, I wouldn't mind that. That's that sort of level he needs to step through. Unga says Don King took the WBA to Cork to force the mandatory, so they invented super and regular. Liam says, Zoo Ringwalkers on. I'm out. Always a pleasure to see you next week, Boxing Squared. Thank you for joining the live stream, Liam. Probably gone by now, but hopefully you enjoyed it. WBA is as bent as the WBC. Let's not kid ourselves. They all exist to feather their own nests. And sure, there's talk about the IBF might be a bit more moral than the others, but they've done dodgy things over the years as well. David says there is no lineal heavyweight title. The lineage was broken when James J. Jeffries retired undefeated in 1904. I've spoken about this on the channel before. Great video that Rummy's Corner did on that topic if you do want to check that out. Unga says, okay, they're talking about the lineage. I'll skip past that bit. Hunter Povetkin fight an eliminator for regular or super title. Well, it's just listed as an eliminator. They've both got minor heavyweight titles. The one's got the international, one's got the intercontinental title. I mean, who knows? We'd have to assume, as Unga does, for the super title. Okay, lots of chat about lineal. I'm going to skip past that. Apologies for that. So D. Hodges says, no one wants undisputed. They don't want one person with all the belts, no money. Well, I guess it depends who has the belts. But, I think everyone would like an undisputed fight to happen because it's such a rarity. But it just feels you get so close and then all of a sudden it gets wrecked away. But, the realities of the division and mandatories does catch up with these things. Fujimoto is coming to get the knockout in the first round against Dubois, says Angus Young. Yeah, he's going to get wrecked in that one. Hunter will box from range and use his legs to tie Povetkin, but Hunter is open for counters, and if Povetkin lands, it might be lights out. Yeah, I mean, if you watch Michael Hunter in some of his more recent fights, from 2018 onwards, he is there to be hit at times and can, leave himself a bit open. And Povetkin, you know, he can crack, and if he catches up with them, and he has caught up with a number of boxers through his career, it's going to be interesting. Liberalism is a cult. Boxing Squared. In the first fight, Joshua-Ruiz, before the fight and during the fight, AJ kept his mouth guard out of his mouth. Do you know why? I've always wondered that. Before the fight and during the fight. Don't know. Will Magic Man, Mike Tyson had the... Okay, this is the lineal conversation again. I'll just be skipping past some of that. So Ghost Dog says, anyway, you look at this as a whole, the heavyweight boxing scene right now is looking pretty good. It may not have been a great year, 2019, in terms of the heavyweight division and maybe some of the fights we didn't see. Sort of seems there was a lot of hurry up and wait, a lot of stay busy type fights, talking about the next big fight as opposed to making the big fights. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of optimism about the next crop coming through, and if things line up, maybe we will see a few more bigger fights. So David Mason says, they're talking about lineal there. Any women boxing fans in the chat says hip flippin' mama. Stormy Daniels says Marciano 49-0. David Mason, Unga, you also need to look up what lineal means. I think one thing I noticed, because I probably should do a video on this topic, some of the most misused or misspelt words within boxing comment sections, and the amount of time that it's been called the linear champion, which would mean the straight line champion, is, I mean, I must have had hundreds of those this year. And loose and lose, that's certainly one of the others. The spelling of Dominic Breazeale's name seems to be almost impossible for to be spelt correctly. There's a number of those type things that crack me up when I see them in the chat. So David McLean says, still can't find that B sample. Jasper says, AJ will be completely different for this fight, so I'm not sure we can take too much from the first fight. Well, clearly they've taken a lot from the first fight with some of the way that they've prepared and trained for it. Povetkin gonna clack him, says Active Movement. Adam says, Boxing Squared, what's your fight on the bill you're looking forward to most? Well, the main event and co-main event, I mean, it could be the co-main event, Povetkin and Hunter, just might steal the show. Hopefully it's going to be a good one. Jim Davis says, thank you, it's my bedtime now at 12:09 a.m. Yeah, it's getting on here. I'll be up for a couple of hours to watch that weigh-in and probably do a quick video off the back of that. So by the time that happens, I'll probably be hitting the hay at about 4 a.m. here in New Zealand time. We'll see. Liberalism is a cult, says I made ones. Okay, I'm not sure what that's about. Damo says, fantastic channel. You spend time with your subscribers. I'm out. Well, I mean, yeah, this is one of these sort of features with the live stream that I was asked for a long time, but it was, yeah, so I'm glad that I mean, we must have been doing it about 2 or 3 months now. Yeah, I'll see where I take things in 2020 with live streams, and I might move my streaming software over to StreamYard. Seems that that's where everyone can do a few more different things. I haven't worked out all the bells and whistles on this one. This is Streamlabs OBS, but yeah, I mean, I like to talk boxing, talk heavyweight boxing, obviously in particular. And yeah, I think the live stream does give an opportunity. We haven't even covered the Wilder pay-per-view numbers, and maybe we won't. We're already 2 hours 37 into it. Jeez. I will wrap it up in the next couple of minutes. So Leonard says, does Usyk get in your top 10 after his win, or do you wait for another heavyweight win? He's in my top 10 right now. Ghost Dog says, lineal is still a non-existent physical belt. It's just the title. Do you agree? It's just I mean, I like the idea of the man who beat the man. And sure, it's an invisible title, but it is the man who beat the man type thing. And I know some people talk about the lineage being broken, but I agree with it. You know, if that person retires and it is broken, you have to restart the lineage. And that's obviously where we get to with Tyson Fury eventually having it back in 2015 when he beat Vlad. What's your take on the White fight? Well, I think he wins. He probably batters Marius Wok right throughout. Maybe a stoppage second half of the fight. Not sure Wok's going to offer too much, but it could have the potential, like the Hellenius fight of 2017, to potentially be a bit of a stinker. So Hudson says, hey Boxing Squared, keep up the good work with your channel. More people than you know out there. Well, thank you for the feedback and for coming to the channel and supporting it. Everyone here who's been here or supports the channel, whether you watch one video a week or a month or all of them, I appreciate it. Boxing Squared, do you think Dubois beats Parker? Right now, it's a pretty close fight. If it's in a few years, probably favour Dubois. Stormy says, greatest white male heavyweight of all time. I'll leave that to the chat to weigh in on. Angus Young says, Rummy's Corner video and lineal title, it's real who beat the man. Yeah, I mean, that's what I was just mentioning before. AJ is tired, fatigue gonna kick in early, he mentally not well, he looks like he don't want to, but he quit last fight. I mean, maybe overtraining might be a factor, but we'll have to see the fight and how it plays out, how he looks in there, because if he does gas after a few rounds, people will certainly point to that. Okay, so we're almost 2 hours 40 into the stream. I'm going to wrap it up now. Caught up on the chat. I probably missed about 150 comments because the scrolling and all that, but apologies if you left a comment earlier and I couldn't get to it because I couldn't find it again. But thank you one and all, wherever you are in the world, morning, noon or night. Hope you're having a good day and look forward to the boxing this weekend. Big card. Don't forget Arslanbek Makhmedov also in action as well, the heavyweight prospect out of Russia who's fighting in Montreal. That's also happening on Saturday in Canada. So have a great weekend, and we'll be back here same time next week, 9:30 New Zealand Standard Time. So wherever you are in the world, have a good one.